Well, greetings and salutations to the 310 tribe, wherever you may be this fine Monday, December 30th, the second to the last day of 2024. Just want to say hello to everyone and greetings from me and my family and my co-host here, my intrepid co-host. Anyway, so we are. I was waiting on. Had a Pastor Ken Ortize as a guest today. I haven't heard from him, so I don't know if he's going to be able to make it today. Something may have came up, so I'm going to continue to plug on like I always do. And if he shows up, I'm going to bring him in, and we'll continue in grand fashion. So, hello to everyone. Hopefully, you guys had a great Christmas. We had a pretty good Christmas. Don't you think? Yeah. I got this. Yeah, he's got like a old school digit. It's a kind of like a Polaroid, but it prints out on like receipt paper. It's pretty cool. Anyways, so busy holidays. It was a great time with the family, just unplugged and basically um, turned my brain off for a little bit, just because I constantly think too much. That was what I'm told. So, with that said, I have a 2024-2025 program lined up, and wanted to talk about things this year that stood out that were kind of crazy, prophetic, all manner of oddities going on with the news these days. And then, secondly, I want to look into 2025 and maybe talk about some predictions as well. But before I do, let me just say hello to everybody. I came on pretty quickly here. Let's see. We got, let's see. I'm trying to get it back to the very beginning here. Kevin C., I see you're the first one on. Good job. I never make it on time for anybody's live streams. Diane Williams, how are you, Diane? Rob Barber from Ontario, California, or I guess that's Canada. Canada, yeah. Renee Rutledge, hello. My cup overflows. Coco Bear, good to see you, Coco Bear. And Pamela, good to see you, Pamela. Caterlin, Ruthie, and you know what? I probably should send this out to my mom as well. Elaine Palmer, how was everybody today? Hopefully you guys had great holidays. Give me 1 second. I'm going to send this to my mom to make sure she's got it. I'll appear later in the video. Yeah, later in the video he'll show up. Might be random times. Okay, share, copy link, and send this to mom, or as the kids call her, Gigi. All right. Well, regardless, I have a jam-packed show. I don't. It's going to be long. I'm going to try and make it not too long, but um, got a lot of stuff to cover. So, with that said, let me just start off. Let's start off with a prayer, and then I'll go into my thoughts about all the things we're about getting ready to talk to. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for today. We thank you for the time. We thank you for the year you've given us, Lord. It's been so chaotic and frenetic, but Lord, you're revealing the nearness of the hour by allowing these things to occur. And I pray that those that have eyes to see and ears to hear, Lord, would pay attention to the warning signs that you're giving us in these late moments right before the rapture of the church. We thank you for your time. We thank you for giving us eternal life through your Son, Jesus Christ. We thank you for all the blessings that you give us and bestow upon us each and every day. And it's in your holy name we do pray. Amen. All right. So when it comes to understanding things from like a biblical perspective, we often use the phrase understanding the times. Well, that comes from First Chronicles 12:32, and it was a commendation of sorts to the sons of Issachar who understood the times and what they should do with regard to the nation of Israel. And when you talk to people these days, especially people in the church, you kind of get there's kind of two extremes that you kind of run into all the time. And the first is those that kind of just dismiss things out of hand, and they'll say, well, we probably don't understand what's going on right now, but it'll make sense. So, somebody will be able to explain it and give us an explanation for what's going on. And then the other hand, the other extreme you have is those people that take every news article and then they blow it up and make it like it's directly tied to the second coming, and it's like a critical emergency every time something breaks. And I think as Bereans, people that study the Bible and try to see where things line up scripturally, as well as being in the spirit, these sons of Issachar, and that we understand the times. I think we have to look at every situation, at least acknowledge it, take in the peripheral information, and then base that off of what does the Bible say, right? And so I know when we talk prophecy and we talk predictions and things, you always get the immediate cacophony of cacophony, or however you say that word, of people coming out and just saying, people have been predicting this forever. They point to the Millerites or they'll point to Harold Camping, and it's just kind of like, okay, they just want to dismiss it at hand. And I thought it'd be interesting if I listed out some predictions, not necessarily from a theological perspective, but just predictions that have become almost a laughing stock these days because of how terribly wrong they've been. So let me just start here. In 1876, quote, "This telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication," end quote. That's from William Orton, who was the president of Western Union. 1889, "Fooling around with alternating current AC is just a waste of time. Nobody will use it ever." That was Thomas Edison. 1903, quote, "The horse is here to stay, but the automobile is only a novelty. It's a fad." End quote. That was from the president of the Michigan Savings Bank, advising Henry Ford's lawyer, Horace Rackham, not to invest in the Ford Motor Company. 1920, quote, "A rocket will never be able to leave the Earth's atmosphere," end quote. This was from the New York Times, which interestingly, they had to issue a lighthearted retraction of that original article when Apollo 11 headed to the moon in 1969. 1949, quote, "Computers in the future may only have 1,000 vacuum tubes and perhaps weigh only 1.5 tons," end quote. That's from the Popular Mechanics magazine when they were looking at a 30-ton calculator and dreamed of making it smaller. 1959, quote, "Before man reaches the moon, your mail will be delivered within hours from New York to Australia by guided missiles. We stand on the threshold of rocket mail," end quote. That was from Arthur Summerfield, the U.S. Postmaster General. I, for one, am very glad that my mail does not get delivered by rockets. I don't know about you guys, but I think that'd be kind of a terrifying way to get get incoming mail. Uh, 1977, quote, "There is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home," end quote. And that was from Ken Olsen, who was the founder of Digital Equipment Corporation and appears to have missed an opportunity. Though to be fair, his computers were bigger than many people's homes at the time. 1992, "The idea of a personal computer or communicator in every pocket is a pipe dream driven by greed." And that was from Andy Grove, the CEO of Intel. And then 1995, quote, "I predict the internet will soon go spectacularly supernova and in 1996 catastrophe catastrophically, can I say that word? Catastrophe catastrophically collapse." And that was from Robert Metcalf, founder of 3Com, inventor of Ethernet. And then we have in 2010, this is one of my favorites. Quote, "Using Twitter for literate communication is about as likely as firing up a CB radio and hearing some guy recite the Iliad." That was from Bruce Sterling, a science fiction writer and journalist, when talking to the New York Times. So those are some just demonstrably, laughably, hilariously failed predictions from some of the leading people of the time, in their different genres, or, fields of profession. But here's some predictions that I think because I wanted to balance it out with predictions that were accurate, that actually came true, and that were way ahead of the time. And I'm not even talking about the predictions of Israel becoming a nation again, nothing prophetic. This is simply just things in the world going on at the time. 1919, Marshall Foch on the treaty of I think he was French of or Foch, Marshall Foch on the Treaty of Versailles. Quote, "This is not a peace. It is an armistice for 20 years." And he was correct nearly to the day when World War II broke out. So he said that in 1919, World War II broke out in 1939. So 1926, this is from Nikola Tesla in his being quoted in the Collier's Weekly. And he says, quote, "When wireless technology is perfectly applied to the whole earth will be converted into a huge brain. We shall be able to communicate with another instantly, irrespective of distance. Not only this, but through the television and telephony, I guess is what he's trying to say. We shall see and hear one another as perfectly as though we were face to face, despite intervening distances of thousands of miles. And the instruments through which we shall be able to do this will be amazingly simple compared with our present telephone. A man will be able to carry one in his vest pocket." And I was reading through Reddit on this, and the biggest argument from this whole thing was that people don't wear vests anymore. So I guess if that is your complaint against this, then it's pretty trivial. Nobody can forget 1961. This was President Eisenhower's farewell address from the Oval Office, in which he warned of the coming military industrial complex. Definitely right on that part. 1987, and I found this interesting. Quote, "We will have high definition widescreen television sets and a push button dialing system to order the movie you want to see at the time you want it. You will not go to a video store, but instead order a movie on demand and then pay for it. Video cassette tapes as we know them now will be obsolete, both for the showing pre-recorded movies and for recording movies. People will record films on 8 millimeter and will play them back using laser disc or CD technology. And with this revolution in delivery and distribution, anyone, any size town or hamlet will see the movies he or she wants to see." 1987. That was from Roger Ebert, the noted film critic. Okay, so with that said, there's been good predictions and bad predictions. I think the biggest determination between which predictions are come true and which are demonstrably false lies all within the idea of potentiality. When you look at something and you say, okay, there is this thing. Let's just use for example the first time a message was sent from one computer to another computer digitally, right? I think when you have two different kind of perspectives when you look at this, one person could say, uh, "Good Lord, why would I want to do this? This seems, the only other person on the other side of the planet that has a computer this big is the Russians," or they'll come up with a million different reasons why it shouldn't work or why it won't work in their opinion. And you have that kind of mindset. And then you have the other person that sends the message, and as soon as that message is sent and received, that person then looks at the potential of this and saying, "Okay, this is groundbreaking technology. This is gonna change how we do things. This is gonna impact the postal system." They're thinking through all the iterations of things, right? And it's having that ability to look beyond the what I call the tyranny of the present, where you're confined by the environs of the day and age in which you live in. If you can look beyond that and see the potential in something, whether that's a militarization of that technology or if it's a commercialization, whatever the case is, if you can look at that and even in its present state and look at the potential beyond it, I think you fall more often than not in the accurate category of making predictions because you're not judging something by the the day and age that you live in. You're not judging it by today's standards. You're judging by what it could be, even if you stripped away all the skeptical criticisms and constraints that people often throw at a situation. So I think that's really the biggest difference, is looking at the potential on things and not underestimating um, uh, something simply because it doesn't exist in the present day, or it seems too incredible in your mind to exist in reality. So I take, for example, when guys like Elon Musk say that they want to have colonies on the moon, or something set up on Mars by the end of the decade, I kind of take them at their word, because given the trajectory of technology, the exponential trajectory of technology over the last 125 years, um, I definitely think it's absolutely a certainty that we can do this. It's just a matter of when. When are we going to be able to do this, and how much time and effort are we going to put into doing this? So that also runs into the brick wall of what the Bible says will happen and what won't happen, right? And so we don't get that spelled out exactly in the book of Revelation, but we do get technologies that I've referenced here many times. Uh, there's technological capabilities that we see in Revelation that have confounded scholars and students of the Bible alike for millennia, because they didn't understand the technology of it. Um, but you could certainly look at the application, or the potential for that application, and say, okay, that looks like it could work. And so, with that said, I was going back and listening to some of Ken Ortiz's older um, um, programs. He used to do this program called "What's the World Coming To?" And I honestly, I don't know if he's still keeping up with that or not, but it was a separate podcast for a while. Um, but in there, he was talking. He made reference to something that I found pretty profound. And it's one of those things. And here's the great thing about Pastor Ken's messages: when you go back through YouTube and type in "What's the World Coming To?" Ken Ortiz or whatever, when you listen to them, it almost speaks like he's talking about today. He may make some kind of political references that may date that message to the time. But if you didn't know anything about the politics or anything about current events, you would simply listen to the message and be like, man, that's just as relevant today as it was when he said it, 5 or 6 years earlier. And so one of the things he was talking about was the potential for, or not the potential, but the main challenges for the mark of the beast technology is not the mark of the beast itself necessarily. It's the infrastructure that mark of the beast technology will ultimately culminate in, or will actually manifest and be available to the public writ large when that time comes. The big thing about that is not the mark itself necessarily. It is from a biblical perspective, but like just thinking about how it's going to come about. It's all the infrastructure, the logistics, all of that stuff that goes into making that little mark or chip or whatever it's going to be work, right? And so you and I today, we may talk about what the mark of the beast is, and there's a lot of, 1,000 different opinions on that. And I don't want to get wrapped around the axle on that part. We don't know what it's going to be necessarily, because right now it could be a number of different things. We have the technology now where there could be, um, there's at least 4 or 5 different viable options in which directions it could go. But if we look at the infrastructure for what's coming, I think that is the key to understanding what the mark is gonna be, or at least how it's gonna come about based on the technology, because that infrastructure's gotta be put in place first, right? And if, for instance, it's like, it's like if you had a manufacturing business in China and you wanted to make a lot of money and be prosperous and all that, you have to have markets to send it to, right? You may have the product in China, it may never leave China because it doesn't have a way to get to wherever it's going to go. You have to have infrastructure. Let me not use China. Let me use the United States. In the 1800s, the late 1800s, as the U.S. is expanding out west, I mean, the main thing that helped fuel that, or helped keep that going and that momentum going, was the railroad system. that connected the East Coast to the West Coast, and allowed people and goods and services and products and all that to go back and forth, um, from both sides of the United States. And so that infrastructure had to be developed in order for that city in California to become for the California to become a state and prosperous and all that. I mean, if it were simply left to people moving out by wagon trails, I mean, the California may have been a state, 20 years after or 30 years after the fact. I mean, much later, I think things would have been slowed down considerably because of the distance and how hard it was moving across the Rockies and across the western part of the United States with the deserts and so forth. So all that to say, the infrastructure, when we look at the infrastructure today, if we're looking at who the 10 kings are, who the false prophet is going to be, what the beast kingdom is going to look like, or how it's going to come about, I think we kind of hone in on the end state of it and say, it's a multi-headed chimera beast that has the mouth of a lion, feet of a bear, spots like a leopard. It's got 7 heads, 10 horns. We get into the specifics, and that even that in and of itself is challenging because of the symbolism. Um, Not so much the symbolism with the animals, but more with the heads, the horns, in the crowns. Um, I guess if we look at simply the inside of it and try to judge that off of today, it's hard because there's not more things are aligning now than it was, say, 30 years ago. But I'm just saying it's going to be very difficult today to try and pinpoint anybody because so much of that is similar across the board. And so you either have to go with a simply with almost like a purely symbolic approach to how you see the heads, horns, and crowns, and you might align those with the BRICS nations because of the animals associated with those particular countries. You might do it, with some specific one aspect of it. But I think when we step back and kind of look at it, the whole picture, and look at the system itself and how is the system being set up, it certainly seems tied in with what will become a central bank digital currency. And, my thoughts are that when the rapture happens, it's going to collapse the United States. And because so much of the global economy circles and orbits around the United States, the US dollar, when that begins to tank, something will have to replace that because it's going to create a giant vacuum. And we've seen the BRICS countries rise up and try to present some kind of alternative to the US dollar as a global reserve currency. I don't know how successful that will be. It may be something that's in place as the US collapses, and it's a kind of a stopgap. But ultimately, we know that the system will become digital. The currency will become digital because that will be put into the chip, which goes into the human that wears it, and then that becomes the identifying um, marker for them, both spiritually and physically here on the earth. Now, with that said, I want to kind of look back over 2024 and go over some of the kind of key main issues, main things that were going on in 2024, and then kind of touch on a few of them. I don't want to spend too much time on 2024, but there's so much that's happened this year that, um, used to say, if I were asking somebody this question, what would be the biggest thing that you saw in 2024? And I think now you have to kind of tweak that and say, okay, out of all the earth-shattering events that have happened, which of those has become the most significant in your mind? So I tried to just specifically stay on this track here. So let me go back in time. We have March 26th. We have the container ship, the Dolly, crashes into the Francis Scott Key Bridge. April 8th, we had the second part of the eclipse that crossed the United States. So the first part of the eclipse came across United States one direction, and then this one is making the X. So it's making the X over the US, and that was kind of a big to do. And he and I went to go out and look at it in our backyard, but we were only at 99% occultation, and we had to go somewhere further south in order to get that 100%. So April 13th, Iran strikes Israel for the first time from Iran with hundreds of drones and missiles. Most of those were destroyed. I think only a handful made it in, and they landed pretty much in non-populated areas. May 19th, the Iranian hardline president Ibrahim Raisi dies suddenly in a helicopter crash. Masoud Pezeshkian, I can't say his last name, replaces him. June 27th, presidential debate, Biden versus Trump, and this would spark the beginning of the end of the Biden dynasty, as he is basically forced out of office from within the Democrat side. July 13th, we had the attempted assassination of Trump at Butler, Pennsylvania. We know I am of the firm belief that this was a God thing. I mean, I think had he not turned his head just a fraction of an inch, I mean, he would have been missing half of his head very easily. So I do believe that's a God thing. Again, I'm not saying that Trump is the Messiah. I'm not saying he's a pastor in chief. I'm simply saying God is using him at this particular time for a particular reason, and so allowed him to stay alive for whatever this reason is being going to be. And I think that's specifically tied to Israel. Um, July 26th, we had the Olympic ceremony opening. And if I miss anything, guys, please once I get done, if I miss something, feel free to throw it up there in the chat. August 6th is the Harris officially replaces Biden after their internal coup d'etat. We had September 17th and 18th was the Lebanon electronic device attack, or what most people call the pager attacks. September 26th, Hurricane Helene became the most disastrous inland hurricane and most expensive, in my opinion. Right, and what I've read thus far, it says it's the second or third most expensive behind Hurricane Katrina and Harvey. I think Helene will easily eclipse it once all the numbers are in, because Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, and then Katrina obviously impacted mostly Louisiana. But with Helene, you had 6 different states that were impacted. 6 states that were impacted. So, hey, Pastor Ken.
How you doing?
You're like, wait, was that today?
Huh?
I'll bring you on in a second. But yeah, so that was September 26th. November 6th is the Trump victory, and I also attribute this as the Trump political collapse of the now bankrupt leaderless Democrat Party. November 19th was the Russia-Ukraine war reaches the 1,000th day. And then November 20th, we had the arrival of the drones and the spheres. And from November 6th forward, this has kind of been ongoing, but we've had all of the cabinet picks that have come out for Donald Trump, and they've been everyone, one after the other, has just been this like huge news item that's come out, and there's all this controversy around Kash Patel and Matt Gaetz and all the folks that are coming in. And then the last one here, which has just been in the last 2 things, really, the last couple of days, has been there's been plane crashes. There was a plane crash in South Korea that killed 175 people. There's been 2 other plane crashes. There was one in Azerbaijan that looks like it was shot down, but there's 2 more. There was one in Europe, and I want to say one in Canada that had landing issues with the landing gear. And both of those other ones, most of the passengers survived. I don't think there was any fatalities, but it seems like the grouping of all these airplane problems all together. And then just, I guess, yesterday we had the death of President Jimmy Carter, who was kind of the first president I remembered as, was a kid. I remembered him, and then I remember immediately after was Reagan. So, Pastor Ken, glad to have you on. I'm so thrilled that you're here. You didn't miss much. I just went through kind of what the major stories were for this year. And then I did some failed predictions that we've seen in the past. Guys that said that nobody will ever use a cell phone. Nobody wants a phone and they carry a phone around in their pocket, or whatever. And then the accurate ones, you got guys like Roger Ebert in 1987 saying that, hey, movies are going to go you're just going to be able to push a button on your TV and you can order a movie to your house. You don't have to go to, Blockbuster, anyway, so there's been good and bad. And my main thrust in that was, I think it's all about when you look at something and you look at the potential for something. So if
Yeah.
you look at some new thing that's groundbreaking and you can see the potential in it, I think you make those predictions fairly accurately. But when you look at something and you dismiss it out of hand, I think most of those people, when I went through like 6 or 7 different ones, this one here, the 1876, this telephone has too many shortcomings to be considered as a means of communication, and that was from William Orton, the president of Western Union. Or Thomas Edison in 1889 is like, nobody's ever going to use alternating currency, EC currency. That's crazy. Nobody's ever going to use that. So all that to say is that I think what the Bible does, especially when you have a sound understanding of biblical eschatology, is it gives you, it opens your eyes, and I see this with churchgoers alike. You get the two main camps, but one camp says, it's nothing, that they kind of dismiss it out of hand. And they kind of normalize whatever's going on. And then the other side of it, they take it to the other extreme, where everything becomes this everything. Jimmy Carter dying is directly connected to the second coming, and it's like everything's a crisis. So I don't know. How have you been, and how was your Christmas?
My Christmas was great, and I'm doing okay. And for a guy my age, I'm going to be 75 next month. So, I have this T-shirt for my grandson. He knows I'm a big fan of Princess Bride, and of course, it's just inconceivable. And I think that some of the things you're talking about, people are saying that's inconceivable. And as Andre the Giant said to Vincenti, I don't think you know what that word means.
You know what's inconceivable? My friend, I've tried to post it on Facebook the other day, and it just, I don't know, it went weird. The picture got hung up or something. I'm going to try it again. But Harv is 89 and he still works. He still drives. He drives between Texas and Kansas and all over the place. Very active
Wow.
guy, 89 years old and still out there evangelizing. He tells everybody he knows about the Lord. He's had 4 different heart attacks, and he's prayed over each one, and just like the next day he was fine. And this is going back almost 20 years. He's had these different, and
Yeah.
he's prayed and been healed like instantly. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was a former Navy pilot. He was flying Crusaders. He had a UFO experience right off the coast of Southern California, right where they had the Tic Tac incident that happened back in 2004 with the Marine pilots out there. So,
Yeah.
anyways, he's been a fascinating source of stories for me and just encouragement to see that he's 89. He's just still going, man. I think he's going to make it to the rapture. Is my
Yeah. Well,
at this rate. So,
I think the key is you just keep on moving. You just don't
yeah,
stop. Because I think, a lot of people just,
absolutely. Hey,
yeah. So a lot of people just get tired and they just want to take it easy. And that's the quickest way to die, I think.
yeah. Well, I went over the stories from 2024. I didn't know if there's anything in particular you wanted to hone in on. I mean, we started off in March 26th was when that Dolly ship crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge. You had the April 8th eclipse, that made the X on the United States. April 13th, Iran strikes Israel for the first time from Iran. You had May 19th, the president, Ibrahim Raisi, dies in the helicopter crash. You had the 27th June presidential debate, which kind of was the beginning of the end for the Biden dynasty. And then obviously it's attempted assassination attempt of Trump. What in this year, in your opinion, I mean, I guess, what stood out to you the most out of all these crazy, unprecedented stories that have happened over the year? What were the top, few for you that you felt, man, this was prophetically profound?
Well, the one thing that stood out to me most was the attempted assassination of President Trump, mainly that it didn't succeed. I mean, I pretty much felt like they're going to take him out, because they've basically tried every angle they possibly can, and I thought that they would find a way to succeed. And I think that, again, their approach, in my opinion, was that instead of trying to overtly kill him, they would just overtly not try to keep it from happening. And suddenly you have all of these things. I mean, it's pretty well documented that there were numerous and probably still are numerous efforts to take him out. And I think what struck me was that I felt like, as even he himself has said, this was a divine intervention. This was something that had to be of God. And it's kind of one of the things my wife and I pray. Even now, we pray every day for not only God to expose the evil and the evil regimes, but also that God would protect the president. I mean, I was blown away by his Christmas, basically declaring the gospel. I was shocked by that. There's just a whole lot of things like that have really surprised me to how far even he has moved in terms of the influence of really godly people around him. So when you talk about people like Pete Hegeseth and J.D. Vance and other people who are in his immediate circle, it's unlike before when he was president. He had people like Paula White, which was really troubling to me. But now we seem to have people who are pretty grounded, not only psychologically, emotionally, and morally, but also spiritually. And I think that we're watching. I think the very fact that I think that he won by the margin that he won. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought if he survives, he'll win, but I did not anticipate that he would win by the margins that he did. And so, I really think that he acknowledges that. I think you can't help deny that God is involved in doing something here, which, in a way, when you talk about being surprised by something, well, I'm not surprised that God spared him, because my wife and I have been praying for that every day for the last 4 years. But also that, but it's like many things, is when you pray for something, but you're kind of, Lord, help me with my unbelief. And you see something so clearly of God. And think about this: what Trump's election did is it took down two political dynasties, the Clintons and the Obamas. And now the Democrats are in this state of chaos and confusion. And again, you sit back and go, Donald Trump, by winning, and by winning by such a margin, completely, I think, eliminated certainly the Clintons' influence on politics into the future, and to a very large degree, Obama's, because, yeah, and in Obama, to me, has been, I think that Matt Tlaib just did an article recently talking about the machinations of Axelrod and Obama in just shaping what we see going on over the last 4 years. And I think that what Obama didn't have the guts to do when he was president, he didn't have any trouble doing it through Joe Biden. And as he had, the reason why he didn't do it his administration was because he figured this is what's going to happen. And of course, he alienated 75% of the country. So I think that's probably the most impactful thing that I've seen in the last year.
Yeah, and you got to think too, all the people that kind of jumped on the Trump bandwagon right after that happened. I mean, you had Elon Musk came on board officially. Even Mark Zuckerberg came out and was like, that was the most, I'm not going to repeat it, but awesome thing he had ever seen. And he sort of kind of bent the knee to Trump. And then I'm trying to think who else, the guy that owns Amazon,
Bezos.
Bezos, yeah, Jeff Bezos, and all the other techs have basically come in and bent the knee. And I got to imagine too that when Trump stood up and raised his fist in the air and was like, fight, 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 that other leaders around the world had to be like, thinking, would I do that? Could I have done that? And I can't see a Trudeau or a Macron or Schultz or any of these other world leaders like getting up and doing that same thing, like that
Well,
same
Trudeau
fierce.
would have put on disguise.
Yeah,
But I mean, after all, he was a drama teacher, so and now he's a drama queen. So,
yeah, he's a total.
but
I'm predicting one of my predictions of 2025 is he's going to be out, and Polyev is going to be replacing him as the prime minister there. But
yeah,
yeah, I got to agree with you, man. I think the assassination attempt, when I first saw it, I mean, I was shocked like everybody else, but I didn't think through the profound uh, divine nature of this event, because the fact that he had just turned his head just a fraction of enough, if he had turned it even a little bit more over or a little less, he wouldn't be there.
yeah,
His head, half of his head would have been gone. So
yeah,
the fact that it happened the way that it did. Now, you mentioned earlier about that Trump has more grounded believer Mike Huckabee and others around him now, rather than his first term. And I don't disagree. I think the issue that we see with a lot of the folks that have stuck with Trump the entire time, going back to even before January 20th of 2016, a lot of his core inner circle folks like Bannon and others are Christian. I think their eschatology. I think they're probably off on their eschatology. So,
Mhm.
Alex Jones, Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, those folks, from what I know,
Yeah.
tend to be more of like what we would think of as post-trib or maybe even post-millennial, in the sense that they think that we have enough time to really restore America and bring America back to greatness. And I don't disagree. Like, I don't want to, if the Lord tarries and we're here for another 4 years or whatever, I don't want to spend that under Obama 4.0. Like, everybody's sick of it. They're done. I'm not even talking just economically. I'm talking like, and this better than most, being in Washington State, being a Christian parent in a state where basically the state is stripping all your rights away as a parent, and they want to promote all of this ungodly, atheistic, woke, progressive stuff on your students, on the students. I think we have to look at it kind of multifaceted, because if we aren't going to take the lead, it's going to signal to the rest of the world. That's why euthanasia became a thing in the last few years in Canada and the UK and other places. I mean, just on and on and on. And we're projecting weakness. It's
Yeah.
profound to me right now that Trump is basically, nobody's running the White House right now. No, Biden's not running it. Harris is not running it. Jill Biden might be running it, and I think Jake Sullivan and the other staffers that are holdovers from the Obama's time, they're probably running it. But Biden himself is not running it. Harris is not running it.
Yeah.
So it's profound to me that Trump has had the amount of influence that he's had, even before he's even taken office.
Yeah.
With other world leaders and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I think that, one of the things that made me a supporter of Trump back in the 2016 election was in one of the debates as he was up there, 9 of them standing up there, most of the Republicans, a lot of them part of the Uniparty, basically. And he made a statement that really struck with me. He said, "I'm the only guy up here who doesn't need this job." And it really resonated with me, because I thought, yeah, these are career politicians. This is what they do. This is what they know. And they really do need to stay in the game in order to stay financially viable and personally viable, their sense of personal importance. So Donald Trump is really he was already a celebrity. He was already incredibly wealthy. He doesn't have a lot of the personal insecurities and identities that the rest of us have. And I think that God crafts people in interesting ways. And I did an interview with the Daily Mail, or not the Daily Mail, but basically a Canadian newspaper a while back, right before the election, and it was very interesting, because when it came out, the second line in this is a national newspaper in Canada, so the second line said, "Ken Ortize endorses Donald Trump." Like, I thought, well, I didn't say that, but anyway, but I think the whole point was that many Christians were afraid to really say that, look, we have a choice between complete, utter blasphemous godlessness and at least the fear of God. And that's the thing I think that to me was, I think in politics, that's sometimes the best choice you have when deciding who you're going to vote. Am I going to vote for somebody who at least has a basic fear of God, recognizes there is a God, there's accountability for behavior, and they may not, I probably wouldn't have them come in and teach a Bible study in my church, but at the same time, we do agree on the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
That it's really, and I think that we find those extremes within the church, where there are the people who are the total purists, that if he's not, and of course you could never please all the Christians with that kind of approach, and then you have the other people who dismiss it, because reality is they don't really spend much time studying scripture, particularly prophecy. And that's what I find with a lot of these guys who buy into the NAR's idea of taking over dominionism and all the stuff, and we're going to rule the world and make it right. I don't find that they're really that deep in terms of their understanding of biblical scripture at all. They, especially the book of Revelation, they don't, they even, I saw a mem one time from a Babylon Bee saying, Calvary Chapel pastor discovers another book to the Bible besides Revelation. And I started laughing. I thought, that's pretty clever. It's pretty funny because I just finished 65 weeks. I'm in Revelation and I'm all the way to chapter 14. But so, but nonetheless, at the same time, you don't realize that there's just about every doctrine of the Bible that is expressed in the book of Revelation. And I found that if you want people to have a sound biblical foundation of what does the Bible teach on just about every topic, you can find it within the book of Revelation. And so I don't know. At the end of the day, I feel like God has. This was more a referendum on the church than it was a referendum on the political system or the nation. Were the Christians, or at least were there enough people who had enough of a sense of right and wrong still amongst us that people could see clearly what the choice was? Now, Bryden, I just saw yesterday, said that he regrets getting out of the race because he was sure he could have beat Donald Trump. The man's been demented for a long time, so I guess we'll give it to him. But you're right; they're not. The 90% of Biden's staff were carryovers from the Obama administration, and that's why I think a lot of people feel. I think great insight that Obama's been running the country through Joe, which he said was his dream.
Yeah, it's true. And he's done a pretty bang up job of leaving the world in a gigantic mess. That Trump he's being forced right now to kind of have to deal with because of the thrust that the Biden administration is trying to get NATO entangled in some kind of World War III scenario with Russia by all
Yeah,
this provocative actions they've been doing here lately. And speaking of Russia, one of the things I found to be unique about 2024, in and it ties in with drones two different ways. One is the level and the scale that drones have been used in the Ukraine conflict by the Ukrainians mostly, even going so far as killing individual soldiers and having it videotaped on the way down as it's hitting a North Korean soldier or a
yeah,
Russian or whoever. And the terror and the fear that you can see in their faces, like, oh, how do you fight against something like that? And I think that if nothing else from Russia, Ukraine, uh, is the escalation with which drones have been utilized in warfare, which we then again see that kind of come around at the end of November with these whatever
yeah,
they are appearing over the skies in New Jersey and the East Coast, and now kind of all over the United States. We've seen
yeah,
some here in Texas, and I know that they've been seen in California, so in Oregon. So you have the drones, and then you have these other things up there that we're not really sure what they are, spheres or orbs
mhm,
or plasmoids or whatever they're called. Um, and those appear to be significantly different. But I think between the assassination attempt, these drones things that have shown up, and then I guess for me the biggest 2024 story was, um, I mean, I guess there's two other ones. The pager attacks in Lebanon, the success and the strategy of doing that, going that route, and seeing it come out successful in
yeah,
maiming, I don't know how many, like 1,000, maybe 1,500, 2,000 Hezbollah leadership, leaders within Hezbollah. So now they're blind or they're missing hands or whatever
yeah,
else.
yeah,
Man, that was a stroke of. I can't remember anything militarily speaking that was as effective. Even I
yeah,
would even say this eclipses like the what was the thumb drive, where they infected the Iranian nuclear facilities and it began
yeah,
to basically overheat their whatever that was called back, and somebody in the chat can probably remember what that was.
yeah,
But um, I remember being in Afghanistan in 2008, and we were like halfway through the deployment. We had to At that time, everything was on thumb drives. I mean, all of our briefings, everything was done by thumb drives, and it was so easy to use it. And then halfway through the deployment, they said, "No more thumb drives. Can't use it on anything." I mean, day one, stop right now. Nobody can
yeah.
use them at all. And that was a hard readjustment to go into like recording things to compact disc but then like a year later, um, Stuxnet, thank you, Diane. Stuxnet happened in Iran, and so you're thinking about it like, okay, this was that far in advance, like that somebody in DoD said across DoD, no more thumb drives. It was like that cut and dry. And
Yeah.
so somebody at that point, that was a year or two ahead of Stuxnet coming out, becoming public. I had to think that this pager thing, they had to have, this has been in the plans for a long time to get into their logistics infrastructure. That's one way to look at it. The other way is that they actually have some kind of technology that they're not revealing to anybody, that they can superheat through acoustics or through radio waves or whatever. They can superheat these kinds of devices. And not just the pagers, but also they had walkie talkies that exploded. There was somebody had an e-bike, one of those electronic bikes that also exploded. So, you know, I don't know, that to me was incredibly shocking. And
Yeah.
and then and then Hurricane Helene, which on this channel, I think I was going through Revelation. This was back in September. I just started the study through Revelation, and I just remember warning people on that Wednesday. I said, "Hey, I don't know what it is about this particular storm, but if you live in that area of Florida, southern Georgia," I didn't know it was going to go all the way up, how it did, but like
Yeah.
I just said, I had a weird feeling about Helene that was different than the other storms that I'd seen.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's interesting because I can't remember who the commentator was, some humorist, but basically he said that they, after the pagers blew up, they called Hezbollah leadership to get their response, and they said they couldn't get anybody to pick up the phone. I think that is the widespread paranoia, but I think it speaks to where warfare is going. We are going obviously to cyber and digital warfare. I've listened to a few. People who supposedly are experts within the Israeli military establishment. And basically, they said both things true. It took them 5 years basically to create all these shell companies that were selling this equipment, but they also were able to remotely detonate them by some kind of sound wave or something of that effect. So all those things were playing into that. And in the same way, I just read a statistic the other day that 80% of the bombardments that are taken between Russia and Ukraine have been drone based, and not expensive drones, inexpensive drones. And it's amazing because the Russians are using what they call their kamikaze drones, which they get from Iran, which basically destroy themselves in their effort to basically they target and destroy themselves. Whereas the Ukrainians seem to have a little bit of a technological edge in the fact that they are firing from these drones and then they're returning and reusing them. But I think it's when you get down to the robotics and the equipment that's being prepared so that more and more everything will go to a cyber digital kind of warfare where people will be doing it remotely increasingly. Now, the US, we're the ones who created this. I had a guy in my church who his job was to sit in Colorado in a room and basically fly drones and blow things up all over Afghanistan and Iraq and so forth. That was his job. He never left the country, but he did it all remotely. We've allowed the other countries around the world to really gain access to that through the Chinese, through other people of that source, that we've allowed so many Chinese students into our technical schools. But at the same time, we're playing this game of real catch up. But even when you talk about the drones things, I think it's inconceivable to say that the U.S. government isn't aware of what's going on. I think Donald Trump said that they have to know. That doesn't mean they're not incompetent, because they have such a skewed view of reality. They have a worldview that's very narrow that causes them to assume things that they shouldn't assume. But nonetheless, I think that is something, and it could be even a rogue element within the CIA that's doing all of this and is not reporting to the White House, because one of the things we know for sure, presidents for a long time have been held in the dark. I mean, even going back to George Bush Jr. During the Iraq War, that there were things he said on TV and interviews that were incorrect. And yet he had outsourced the war to Rumsfeld and Cheney, and really didn't really have his head in that game very much at all. And so the idea that you have this fifth estate behind the fourth or fifth estate behind the scenes that are really machinating and and doing these things parallels with that whole cry of draining the swamp, because the swamp is this whole separate group of entities within the bureaucracies and within the various agencies who really ignore, kind of like when Milley ignored Trump's order to pull the troops out of Syria. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, and I think that this is where Trump has figured this out. Donald Trump Jr. has been really the point person in really vetting all the people that they're putting into positions. And it's going to be interesting. I think I'm really fascinated, really excited to see what happens after January 20th, because we'll see a lot of things that will happen immediately with executive orders. But at the same time, we're going to probably see some real battles for turf, because many of these bureaucrats, being talking about the seventh floor of the FBI, you really ought to just kind of demolish the whole seventh floor and start with the sixth floor, because those guys are all neck deep into all sorts of things. And it's not even about an ideology. It's just about power. It really comes down to just simply a power. So you see Christopher Wray, who comes out and says the virus is from China, and then Biden comes to power and suddenly he says, we don't know where it came from. I mean, you just go, what happens? Well, he's been trained in the system that you just bow the knee to the powers that be and say what you need to do so that you can extend your own career as far as you want.
Yeah, that's also problematic with the military, where you
Yeah.
get up above the rank of '06 or full bird colonel, or captain in the Navy, I guess. Once you get above that rank, it's highly political. And like I knew General Milley as a 1-star. He used to sit next to me at I was a brigade battle captain in Afghanistan in 2008, and he sat next to me all the time. We'd sit there and we had all the TVs up on the screen. We're watching different operations going on at the time because we were the only aviation brigade and theater. And as a 1-star, he was cool. Like, I mean, I just had a lot of respect for him because he was always very forward thinking. But then you
Mm-hmm.
can see the years of being in the DC, inside of the Pentagon, and the corruption, and you can just see how that changed him. And now he's just another creature of the swamp. That he should go to jail for treason. They should definitely go to jail for their role in the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal. That was the most shameful thing I've seen, even more shameful than the withdrawal from Vietnam and Saigon.
Yeah.
Was this because having been there and knowing a little bit about the terrain and the stuff, like that Afghanistan withdrawal could have been so easy. It could have been done so differently if they had just gone out of Bagram instead of Kabul. Same thing
Yeah.
with Kandahar. Um, and so I don't know. I never really thought of myself as having PTSD, but I had PTSD flare up that month of August when that happened. I was so angry, and basically from that point on, I quit watching the news. I mean, I just
Yeah.
very rarely will I turn the news on anymore, just because I'm sure my blood levels were up. Anyways, I kind of look at going into 2024 or 2025 with Trump coming in with his cabinet picks and so forth. I find myself seeing that there's going to be a huge de-escalation in Ukraine, despite the Democrats' efforts, despite NATO's efforts right now, unless there's some direct provocation that Russia can't simply walk away from, like if they, if we accidentally bombed Moscow or something like that took place.
Yeah.
But I think if barring any of that, I think going into 2024 or 2025 rather, we're going to see a peace deal put in place. And right now, Russia controls about 20% of Ukraine. Ukraine had a population in the neighborhood of like 41 million. I think they're down to about 8 million now, and they have about 8.2 that are displaced across Europe and other
Yeah.
places and stuff. Largest refugee crisis since World War II in Europe right now. And for most of the people in the United States, and for I would say most people outside of Eastern Europe, uh, this hasn't really impacted our life other than the cost of gas going up on certain days or whatever. But
Right.
I definitely think that Trump could come in. He would offer some kind of peace deal in the sense that a peace accord where what Russia has now with the Donetsk and the Luhansk and the Crimea areas, I think that just becomes part of Russia, and Ukraine is just going to have to accept what they have now as being Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I think from there, I think the efforts are going to really transition down more into Syria. I think Russia is really, they've repositioned in Libya. I think they're repositioned somewhere near Tripoli. But now, I think, according to at least what we see in Scripture with Ezekiel 38, 39, Syria basically has become a no man's land. It's basically you've got one group claiming authority, and they're a terrorist organization that are illegal, outlawed. So I don't know how long that is going to last. I do think Israel, what Netanyahu talked about in his speech back in the United Nations about the Greater Israel Plan. I do think that they're going to have to expand into Syria and probably even into southern Lebanon in order to control their borders or to
Yeah.
have better security, as well as, and one of my predictions for 2025 is the annexation of Judea and Samaria. I think that has to happen.
Yeah.
I think it used to be a fringe topic that nobody really wanted to talk about inside of the Knesset, inside of Israel politics, because it was highly volatile. And it's kind of like somebody bringing up, some really controversial issue in the United States, like mask or social distancing or some other thing coming back. Like nobody wanted to talk about annexation up until October 7th, 2023. And I think after that date, I think the realization is they're going to have to do that in order for Israel to have any kind of peace. And I think they achieve it, which is what leads to this mindset of them having peace and being in unwalled villages, etc. As we get ready, as that sets up, this is like setting it up for Ezekiel 38, 39. I don't
Yeah.
know. What are your thoughts on annexation of Judea and Samaria in the coming Trump
Well,
administration?
realistically, the only people who have been open to the idea of a two-state solution have been the Israelis. And that's because Israel, if you look at all their history of war, they've appeased every time the Islamic countries. And I think that's why Ezekiel 38 shows them in another state of appeasement, because they are so secure and sense of that. But there is, the Palestinians, the Arabs countries, they've never wanted a two-state solution. Jordan certainly doesn't want a two-state solution, because the very people that are on their border are a threat to their well-being and their survival. So I think that the annexation is something that's going to happen. We saw it with Trump already when he allowed them to annex the Golan. They've already moved into the area around Mount Hamon, and they've taken over those positions that supposedly were held by the Syrians and the UN. They found, I don't know, you probably know this, but they found tunnels, Hezbollah tunnels dug underneath the UN positions, which they had to know that were there. So I think that a lot of this is that political rambling, because it's really the Islamic ploy of you lie to your enemy, you tell him whatever you need to tell him until you get the chance to be stronger than him, and then you crush him. And so I think that the annexation is something that's going to happen. And I think you're right. I think it's going to lead to this idea that there's this peace. One of the biggest problems for Russia right now is Putin would like to find a way out, because they have been devastated. Their economy is devastated. They've lost probably 500,000 men or casualties. I know pastors who were over there who left the country because they didn't want themselves or their sons being drafted into the Russian military. And it's really a bad scene right now. And I think Putin would do anything to get out of it. And I mean, think about how desperate you have to be to allow 10,000 North Korean soldiers to come into your territory and set up, on your property. I mean, you just don't do that. We're freaking out about all the illegals coming across the border. Think about having armed, trained, professional soldiers being brought into your country. And if you get weak enough, I mean, I think, excuse me, one of the perfect examples was when the Crusaders were on their way down to Jerusalem to open up liberate the Holy Lands to Christians. And they came to Constantinople, and what they ended up doing is conquering the city and taking it over and pillaging it and robbing it of everything. They became the Byzantines' worst nightmare, not their greatest help. And I think that's kind of to me, when I saw that he was allowing North Korean troops to come in, that's a sign of how incredibly desperate he is, because he's running out of equipment, he's running out of men and materials. The toll on their economy has been devastating. I know, because we have a lot of pastors that I know in Russia. It's been a nightmare. And of course, they were unable to support Assad in Syria. They have been so depreciated they themselves, I don't think, could engage in another conflict. And so it wasn't so much, I think, that the rebels were able to take over Syria. I think it was that Russia wasn't able to support Assad anymore. And that's cost them reputation around the world. They went from being admired by all the despotic countries in the world, and now they are kind of viewed as being a paper tiger once again, especially because Ukraine, I mean, they're courageous and all the rest of that, but they were not an organized and focused military group like supposedly Russian army is. Now, having been in Russia and talked with a lot of Russian soldiers over the years, I can tell you what, their military is one of the worst trained, worst equipped, worst supported military. Their leadership is corrupt deep to the deepest cores. I mean, I knew guys who were being farmed out. Their generals were selling them to companies to go work for them, to harvest fruits and stuff, and the general would get paid for the works the soldiers did. Their equipment was falling apart. They didn't have repairs, they had spare parts. So in some ways, I wasn't surprised by how they fell apart. What surprised me is the ability of the Ukrainians to decimate the Wagner Group, which the Wagner Group was this paramilitary organization, which really 100,000 men of the best trade. It was Putin's private army, is what it was, and they got decimated. So
Yeah, they've had more problems with the North Koreans. They've had friendly fire incidents between North Korean units and the Russian units, and then just here in the last day or so, they had a friendly fire incident between the North Koreans and the Chechens. So
yeah,
I think the Chechens are not people you're not really wanting to make enemies of,
well, you
but
got to remember, from the North Koreans' point of view, all Russians and Ukrainians look alike. So
they do. They do. I've been following the Ukraine conflict going back to 20, I don't know, 2013 or so. But I
yeah,
remember thinking back then because of everything was asymmetric. Everything, all of the fighters involved, nobody wore uniforms. It was incredibly difficult to determine who was fighting who,
hmm,
especially since Ukrainian and Russian, the languages are so similar, and everybody basically looks the same. They have kind of the Slavic look, so it's impossible to tell who is who. You would know if you were Russian, you could understand, hey, that's a Ukrainian accent, or whatever.
right.
You would know, but everybody outside of that, none of us really understood what was happening. So
No.
um,
It,
I
it's
think
certainly
I
been,
think you're right. It's going to come to an end here, right at
yeah.
the 10-year mark.
Well, we're planning a trip to Israel in March, and our friends who work with us in Israel were surprised that I was willing to do that, because because most people are just going to staying back. But I said, 6 weeks after Trump takes office, the Ukrainian war is going to be over. The Hamas is going to be done. Hezbollah is going to be done. The Houthis are going to be broken, and Iran is going to be keeping their heads down. Because the one thing that Israelis showed by the one time they responded to the attack by Iran was that they showed that they can target whatever they want to hit, and that made the whole Iranian leadership go into hiding. Basically, they're hiding in bunkers because they know that Israel can target them at any moment. And the same that just Netanyahu just said last week, that the Houthi leadership, that he's going to decapitate their leadership. And so, and even with the help of the U.S.'s anti-missile technology, been able to actually stop a hyper missile from being able to reach. They blew it out of the air. So I think they were unprepared for it the first two times. But again, it's interesting the work they're doing in just dealing with terrorism, Islamic terrorism around the world, and that's one of the things I talk about when I talk about the Battle of Gog and Magog. The way I titled it is "The Death of Islam," because I think that's going to be the final dagger in the heart of that system. Not that Islam will disappear, but it will have to change into something different, and I think that's also going to coincide with the rise of the Antichrist, which I think will also coincide with the beginning of the tribulation. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think Gog and Magog is the death of Islam, at least militant Islam, and I think that when you look at what happens is a series of vacuums open up. So the rapture of the church removes the true body of believers from the earth, plus children under the age of accountability, people that are not able to, people with Down syndrome, people that aren't able to make that decision and won't be able to make that decision throughout the tribulation is where I see that those being caught up. Then you have what that leaves is the apostate church, the Roman Catholic system, which has its global networks everywhere. Then all of the cults, all of the faux religions, faux Christian religions, and then basically all the non-believers are left on the earth. And then the next thing that happens is the war of Gog and Magog then removes militant Islam from being a threat. So what you have left is these two giant vacuums have been created. So things are going to have to rush in to fill that.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to need a globalist type religion that is malleable enough to bring in everybody and offend no one. And you have to remove militant Islam from that equation because they just won't go along with it. So
Yeah.
that may happen also during the Red Horse, the rider on the Red Horse, when peace is taken from the earth. That may be finished that way. But I
Yeah.
definitely see that the Ezekiel 38:39 is the black hole for Islam, militant Islam. And I've also kind of looked at the Gog Magog as kind of the reverse Crusades,
Mm.
where
Yeah.
back in the 12th century, you had the Europeans coming to the Holy Lands to reclaim the Holy Lands. Now you're going to have militant Muslim males from all over the world coming and assembling at some place, presumably around or north of Israel, and that's where God wipes them out. In that friendly fire incident, it doesn't answer. I guess it just gives you a little insight into like how confusing conflict can be, and when that time comes, when you have all of these massive armies marching from at a minimum Turkey, Iran, Russia, and then the other auxiliary states like the stands, Kyrgyzstan,
Mm.
Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, etc. And then you have those coming up from Africa, from Ethiopia, Sudan area, and then those coming from the Libya side. You've got people coming in from all over that don't speak the same language, uh, that look different, but yet there's enough similarities in the different groupings there, and they don't speak the same language. Like if you're
Yeah.
Sudanese and you're now working with somebody that's from Libya or from Ethiopia, there's still going to be the issues with language, dialect, etc. And then everybody kind of looking the same, especially if you've got people from the stands all coming over. Uh, I think it's gonna seem overwhelming at first, but God is going to take the all those differences that are being wrapped together, and you got Sunni and Shia groups fighting together against Israel, coming against Israel, and Gog and Magog. God's going to exploit that confusion, and that's where that all of it seems like it's just a mass
Yeah.
fratricide event where, aside from the judgments that come down, now these people are turning on each other, and God is allowing this confusion, the supernatural confusion, to take hold, and all of these forces get destroyed. And now what's left is you have a world without the true body of Christ there. The church is gone. Now militant Islam is gone. What do you have left? You have the best religious organization that has the global network infrastructure already developed is the Roman Catholic Church. And I think that's going to be the vessel by which this, whatever the end time religion is going to be, some kind of
Yeah.
globalist thing or whatever. But you said something in your What's This World Coming to blog podcast, I think it was years ago. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. And you said, and I mentioned this at the outset before you came on, I said something that you said that was very profound. You're talking about the mark of the beast, and you're saying that, obviously it has the eternal ramifications associated with those who take it, etc. But what is the most important thing to look at is the infrastructure, the logistics of how that comes about. How does it come? I mean,
Mhm.
yes, the mark is going to be that little widget that fits in the perfect spot, but on top or right below all of that is the infrastructure that allows that widget to be what it is, that allows
Yeah.
it to be useful. So you have to build everything up underneath it in order for that mark of the beast to actually to work.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty profound way to look at it. And the same thing could go with like the final world religion, the harlot religion, whether we're talking about the false prophet, the 10 kings, or whatever. we look at Revelation 13 and we see the end state of what these things are, but we're looking at it from this side of it. We're left of bang, as the book goes, so left of bang. So we're before the event, and we're trying to make sense of it. So we're looking at the telltale signs of what doesn't fit right. So I like Trump, and I think that as long as we're going to be here on the earth and we have to remain, I'd rather live under that system, under a Trump system, than I would under a Biden or
Right.
Obama, Harris, or whatever system in the remaining time. But in his coming into um, divine providence, whatever you want to call it, you have those people that are jumping on the bandwagon at the last second because they see a winning ticket. And I see
Yeah.
guys like Musk like that, Bezos is like that, Zuckerberg's like that,
Yeah.
other politicians and so forth that are finally coming on board and saying, "Yeah, we support Trump, yeah, yeah, yeah." And I don't hate Musk or anything like that. I think him buying Twitter, had profound effects, et cetera, for free speech in the United States. But so many of the things that he is involved in seem to be the technological capabilities we see expressed in Revelation 13. And
Yeah.
that to me is troubling, whether you're talking about Neuralink, Starlink, the Boring Company, where they bore these tunnels underneath cities, et cetera. Um, all of that, in his own AI system, his own AI platform, and
Yeah.
his own, obviously Twitter, being the largest social media platform in the world. Uh, I see him strategically aligning himself in a lot of these key things that we see in Revelation 13, and so that is troubling to me. And I don't know what your thoughts are on Musk and Peter
Well,
Thiel and Bezos and stuff.
politics makes strange bedfellows. And, selfishly, I'm thankful that Trump won because I saw where things were going and how bad it was going to turn for the Christians in a very short period of time, as well as for America as a whole. What I don't see is Trump as being some kind of messianic figure. And I think that it's eventually at some point, because people always ask me, where's America in the end times prophecy? And I say, I don't see it. And it has to be a diminished nation at the very least, not maybe completely eliminated. But I think the Biden agenda was essentially to try to reduce us to just another version of France and Britain and so forth, that we were no longer this hegemonic power that really could play the game. And this is really the difference, I think, in the political philosophies. Trump says, we're the hegemonic power in the world, and I'm going to invest in making us the ones who decide because we're better than them, which I completely agree. Our values are much better than China's or Russia's or Iran and so forth. So, I agree with that, but I don't think that I feel like that I am thankful for. I like a strong America. America's the greatest country it's ever been. It's the best place to ever live in the history of the world. I used to say that California was the best place to live, and and now you couldn't pay me to live there. But it's just one of those kind of things where I think that we see these things shift, and they can change very quickly. And I say that this goes back into like 1974 when the Shah of Iran was driven out of power. I was teaching a class on the Iranians, Persia invading Israel, Ezekiel 34, 38, and 39. And I was explaining to him, I said, right now, Iran is an ally of Israel. They were at that time. And suddenly the Shah is out of power and they become the greatest protagonist Israel's ever had to face, or antagonist. And so these things can change so rapidly. They can flip so quickly that God doesn't need the process. And yet, at the same time, if you step back and you look at a global scene, I see all of that infrastructure coming together. And it's kind of a love-hate thing, because I don't go on Twitter myself. I'm not interested in social media in that sense. Not my generation, but it's the idea that even Trump now is kind of saying, well, TikTok isn't that bad, and asking the Supreme Court to not allow it to go through, that they have to shut down or sell. It's this interesting thing, because at the end of the day, I think what Musk and Trump and a lot of these guys have in common is they're primarily pragmatists. They're not ideologues. And the Biden administration was ideologically driven, and except for Biden himself, who is really closer to driving Miss Daisy. But they were ideologically driven. But the Trump is not. Trump wants to make America great, and that's very, for him, it's a very simple formula. I pray that God will make America good and that he'll make us godly. Those are really the things that I'm praying for all the time. And so I wouldn't say I'm a MAGA guy in a sense, but I do recognize how God does things. It's like the Jews after Trump put the embassy in Jerusalem, and they called him Cyrus. Well, I mean, I see the parallel in the sense that Cyrus wasn't a godly man as far as I could tell either, but God chose him prophetically to do what he did and to restore Israel. And I think that God may be doing that with Trump as well, that he's decided that he's going to be his vessel to bring about some of these changes. And also, I have one other perspective, is that I don't think that prophetic timelines are fixed in the sense that we think they're fixed. I think that certainly God knows the day and the hour, but I think there's a reason that Jesus said, no man knows the day or the hour, because he said, even I don't know, only my Father in heaven. Because I think that the pace of judgment is predicated on whether we will humble ourselves and seek his face and confess our sins. That God says, I'll heal your land. He said that to Solomon, he'll do that at any time. And I think that and I look at the idea, I also use the parallel with Sodom and Gomorrah, that God told Abraham, if you can find 10 people, and I looked at what the archaeologists say would probably be a population base of 3,000 to 4,000 people in that area. If you take 10 people out of that, that's less than 1%. That's like a third of 1% of the people there. And I thought, if that's a third of 1% of Christians would seek his face and pray, God says, I'll bring healing into your land. And I think that's what we're seeing. But I think there is a point where that's why I say it's more, to me, the election was more of a mandate on really kind of looking at the church and the country we're in and seeing how we respond. Because obviously over the last few decades, we've seen a drifting away from scripture and from devotion to biblical doctrine. I had a gentleman come up to me after service and say, you're a rare breed now. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there's not many of you guys who still keep the Bible. And I said, I don't get out. So, I just don't get around to what other people are doing. But I just thought to myself, what do you talk about if you don't teach the Bible? So, I mean, my opinions are worth what airtime we give to them. But at the end of the day, God's going to be the deciding factor. So I think it's a complicated dynamic. But I think that the Bible tells us very clearly that we shouldn't put our trust in men. And Donald Trump, despite the blessings, the grace of God's given to him and through him, is still a man. And as I've seen over the last few years, so many men, Christian leaders that I've held in respect and regard, fall into some of the most pitiable sins that I just realize over and over again, we all have feet of clay. And anybody around Trump and Trump's cycle, they're people with feet of clay. The danger, you talk about General Milley. I mean, I didn't know that about him because I had no exposure until he was a joint chief of staff. It's unbelievable, but I think that, that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And bribery is alive and well in Washington, D.C., as we see from many, many people. How do Clintons leave office with zero assets? Their total equity was zero. And within 10 years, they have hundreds of millions of dollars. How do you do that? And so Joe was
charity.
Yeah. So Joe wasn't the first to come up with the idea of selling your influence. And so even Hillary said at the Al Smith dinner when she was running for president, you're lucky to have me here because my speaking fees are very, very high.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Speaking of Trump coming into office, let's look at 2025. I was looking this up today because I wasn't sure, but according to the Constitution, I think it's Article 2, Section 1, Clause 8, something to that effect. It talks about the inauguration. It has to happen on the 20th of January, but it doesn't specify where. There's no there's nothing in the
Right.
Constitution that says that it has to happen in Washington, D.C.
There was
And
no DC.
what's that?
When the Constitution was written, there was no DC.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's true. That's true. So, um, I think the capital back then was what? Pencil? Was it in Philadelphia
Philadelphia?
or maybe New York?
Yeah. No, it's Philadelphia thing.
Philadelphia. Here's what I did back in. I did an article back in August or July, I think. Maybe I'm trying to remember exactly what month it was. I think it was right around the beginning of July. And you and I spoke. It was about 4 months ago. It was the last time we talked. So I think the article may have been out already. But let me share this with you guys, and my audience will. This will be very familiar to them. As soon as I find my little icon thingy to share. Let's see where here it is. Let's see. Oh, I don't want that. I want this. Share screen. Okay. Let's put this on the side here. So I did an election tree logic thingy because at the time we didn't know how this was all going to play out. So the first big inflection point was, is there an election? That was kind of the big question people were asking. And then I put the numbers down here that correspond to the little key over here. So least likely course of action, most likely course of action, most dangerous course of action. So obviously we had the election, Trump wins, and then the question now is, do the Democrats concede? And we've seen them float a bunch of different ideas out there recently about trying to use Congress to nullify his votes because he's a treason, etc. Anyways, that when you chase that logic tree all the way down, essentially it ends up, after all the little drama and soap opera stuff associated with that path, if they were to deny Trump, basically it falls on JD Vance. He ends up becoming the president who would then in turn just bring Trump back in. So I think
Yeah.
that's a kind of an effort that they don't see pursuing as being viable. But
Mhm.
with all the drones and the crazy stuff happening over New Jersey and on the East Coast, I think it's possible that the inauguration doesn't happen in DC or doesn't happen in the way traditionally it's happened. And we've only had one other president that's had two non-consecutive presidential terms. Grover Cleveland being the first guy back in the 1880s, and now here. So there wasn't any precedents to say, where does this have to be? Yeah. I think they may change the venue for the inauguration, given all of the threats and all the things we're probably not even privy to. I don't know, but what are your thoughts on inauguration day specifically? Do you think it's going to happen in DC, or do you think it goes off without a hitch? Or and this is all speculation at this point, so feel free to divulge
Well, let
or
me be
not.
very let me be very concise. Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, it's really, I have no idea. I mean, I have not removed from the table the idea that he doesn't survive, and to the time of the inauguration. I think that it's interesting because it all depends on how much chaos that the whole deep state remains in. But the idea of them, trying to pull a coup isn't very high right now because they're so disorganized and there's no clear leadership or no clear uh, but person in charge. And I think that's the significance of the loss of the two dynasties, political dynasties, the Democrats with the Clintons and the Obamas. I mean, Bill Clinton had heart surgery, and Nancy's having hip surgery, and I think it couldn't happen to better people. Bill Clinton looks like he's got Parkinson's. If you've ever watched any of his speeches, his hands just shake like crazy. So you just see this whole octogenarian group of people coming to the end, and there's no recognizable leadership with any vitality. And Trump is just an enigma. I mean, this guy is the Energizer Rabbit got inspired by him. It's I've never seen anybody with that kind of strength and energy, especially at his age. But to say all of that, it's like I don't take anything for granted. Like you say, the last 2024 had so many unprecedented things happen, things that people hadn't anticipated. I feel like the rate of surprises is going up, not down. And so I think just about anything in the world could happen. But again, we pray every day that God will protect him and allow him to take office and allow him to be able to fulfill his agenda. Just which is in reality the idea that it is common sense stuff. It's not brilliance. It's just common sense. The only problem is that most people who live in the limited oxygen content of that space called Washington, D.C., their brains don't function very well, and they are not concerned about common sense, and that's why they spend us into poverty. So, I hate to be so wishy-washy about it, but, it's like, golly, man, it's quite a ride. I mean, this has been an incredible time to live.
Yeah, 2024 has been nuts. I mean, really, it's been nuts every year going forward from,
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I could even say, 2001. I don't know specifically what year it was, but it seems like especially since 2020, things have been going off the rails in unprecedented ways. And so here's another thing for 2025. Do you have any thoughts about I kind of the mind that China might make a move against Taiwan prior to Trump coming into office, since there's very little leadership right now in DC or coming out of DC, and they know that we're stretched really thin, and our armament resupplies are very thin. One of the things I thought that one of the strongest reasons I think China might make a move against Taiwan is to have economic leverage against
mhm,
Trump and the tariffs and all that kind of stuff. Because if they control all of the semiconductor industry,
yeah,
they would have everybody over the barrel. And I think they know that. And
yeah,
um, I don't. Obviously, this is a long shot. I mean that China taking Taiwan is not as easy as it seems,
right,
or else they would have done it a long time ago. Taiwan is a giant porcupine. They have so many
yeah,
different things coming out. I mean, plus they have the potential alliedship of
yeah,
United States and basically the Western world. So I don't know. There's reasons to see why China doesn't do it, but there's also really strong reasons. And China's economy right now is in the tank. I mean,
right,
it is cratering, and you mentioned corruption earlier about the Russians. I mean, the Chinese had these missile brigades that basically none of their missiles are launchable. I mean, they're basically were being filled with water because they had to show 100% perfection. And they also know that's the standard that they're held to, yet they know that they're not given the means to do that. So they have to come up with some kind of a cheap
yeah,
solution in the
yeah,
knowledge that they're probably not going to use these missiles. I mean, that the likelihood of them, but if they ever had to, when Xi Jinping comes down there and inspects, yeah, they're full of fuel, and then they tap on it, it sounds full, and the next thing you know, they can't launch because it's full of water, or whatever the case is. So, what are your thoughts on China, Taiwan going into 2025?
Well, I would say that there's probably maybe a 5% chance that China would do that for some of the reasons you've meant. There's a lot of social unrest right now. There's been actually, we don't hear much about it, but there's been 20 or 30 mass killings by people just going crazy. In other words, the people are beginning to, just like we have people who are kind of on the edge and think violence is a way of expressing themselves. They've had one guy they just executed. He killed 34 people, and he did it with a knife, just slashing and so this keeps and China, of course, keeps that all under wrap. But basically, there's kind of a pressure cooker socially because economically they're struggling, where they're aging. You know this. I mean, the one child policy has just begun to become their worst enemy, and they're losing the ability to support the aged, And that's creating all sorts of social problems. So China has a whole set of problems. But yet historically, too, that every 60 years China has an upheaval, a change in government. And so they've never been stable, and that's stable. And that's the problem with autocratic systems like that, whether it was Russia or otherwise. You can only squeeze the handful of sand so tight before it's all gone. And so that's what happened to the Soviet Union. It just hit a breaking point, where, as Solzhenitsyn said, people refuse to live by lies anymore. And China's going to, I think, is very likely going to hit that before they ever get to the point of being able to evade. Now, the offshot side of that is that oftentimes, in order when the thing is collapsing, what do? You go start a war. You attack somebody. That's the Falkland Islands, Argentine, militant government attacked the Falklands because people were just sick and tired of them. And so you just never know what Satan is going to plan, what despots will do. But I wouldn't put it as a high percentage, because I think that China is not in the place. And I would say that I think that China has watched what's happened to Ukraine, and they've watched not only the impotence of the United States and the confused messages that we've sent, but also they've seen how it didn't go as well as Russia thought it was going to go. Putin obviously took care of a lot of the leadership right away, because they lied to him, especially the FBS, the former KGB, lied to him about how easy it was going to be. And so I think that Xi Jinping is very shrewd. He's very intelligent, and so I think he will. He's allowed Putin to be really the experiment to see how it goes. What will the West do? The truth is, if they chose to invade, there's not a whole lot we could do to stop them. And that's the scary part. And you're right, economically, people have no idea the impact it would have upon us. I mean, I remember talking to one gentleman who was working for he was working with a manufacturer of Peterbilt tractors, trucks. And he said their executives were flying over there to Taiwan with empty suitcases and filling them full of chips, because they weren't able to build their trucks, because they were all relied upon that technology. And they'd come back with suitcases full of chips, and so it's, during the whole COVID lockdown and all that kind of stuff. And so it's one of those things that we're so interconnected economically and strategically, that it's all about influence. And at the end of the day, it's what they feel they can get away with and what they feel that they can't. And so that's the wild card in all of that. If China invades, it's going to be a very different world, and Trump is going to have some significant challenges that he faces right away. And we'll see a surge of Iran and Russia and all these other countries, because it has to be a multi-front effort to paralyze the United States. And so this is why, as China looks at Iran, they look at what's happening with all of their proxies, and then they look what happened in Russia. It's not the kind of environment I think that Xi Jinping would look at and say, now's the time. But I could be wrong. I've been wrong once before, and I could be wrong again.
I am wrong on a daily basis. I wrote an article, I don't know, a while back. It was in 2024. It was this year. I just don't remember the month, but I talked about the how to get to World War III. And basically, it's kind of like what you described. You have the U.S. forces engaged in Europe, then you spread that over to a China-Taiwan scenario, even if it's just the threat of invasion where China's ramping up, and now we're having to divert resources, manpower, ships, and aircraft, etc., to the Pacific. Now you've got a two-front war, just like World War II. And then you take the Pacific and you can divide that into two between China, Taiwan, and then North Korea and South Korea. And we've seen all the drama going on with South Korea in terms of the declaration for martial law, the impeachment, the stepping down of the head of the military, the ROK forces there. Not only that, but I didn't know this until just recently, but the third person in command of South Korea is a U.S. four-star general. That's
Mhm.
part of the PACOM, I guess, part of the Pacific Command, Indo-Pacific Command structure. And so in a time of war, that guy actually becomes the leader of South Korea. So in the present time, it's a U.S. four-star general. I don't remember the guy's name, but I thought that was interesting. But yeah, you could divide the Pacific into two between things going on with North and South Korea and in conflict with Taiwan and China. So now the U.S. forces are split effectively three different ways. And then if you were to add in some type of Middle East conflagration, either the buildup against Israel for Ezekiel 38 or some other kind of skirmish that we're not privy to maybe Iran or Israel takes out Iran's nuclear facilities and that escalates into something else. Now the U.S. is spread four different ways, and that, I mean, that right there is a recipe for disaster for the United States. We'd be so overextended. Guys like me that are retired twice over would be absolutely recalled back to active duty. Would be immediately sent to whatever the front is, and
Yeah.
and it would be bad. So I think I can see a scenario where that plays out if God removes his hand fully from the United States. If the US was to collapse or something prior to the rapture, I think that could be a way. But you're right. I don't think it's a Red Dawn scenario where North Korean troops are paratrooping in or coming in airborne over Washington State or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think it'd be multifaceted. It would probably start off with some type of EMP attack on strategic places around the United States. Sleeper cells would be activated already here. So there'd be a lot of craziness going on, and we probably would not have a good understanding of who's doing what to where. And
Yeah.
so, what about the spread of nationalism? I think with the reelection of Trump, and then obviously the leader of Argentina, and I can never remember the guy's name.
Yeah.
Then you have the other populist leaders in Poland and Hungary, as well as Italy, very much a nationalist. Her name Melinda something, and then
Yeah.
you've got Nigel Farage in the UK, who their party lost the election, which allowed for the Prime Minister Keir Starmer to come in, who's basically a socialist, or he is a socialist. Um, but I think we may see the rise of other nationalist leaders. Bolsonaro in Brazil may come back into power if he's released from prison. That may come down from U.S. pressure on the Trump administration pressuring the Brazilian government to release him from prison. And same thing with other places around the United States. El Salvador, very much a nationalist leader. So what do you take here? Let me rephrase this. We know by the time Revelation 13 comes, the world seems to be divided up into at least 10 regions, 7 to
Mhm.
10 regions, and then ultimately that's all collapsed under the leadership of one guy, the Antichrist. So it seems like the idea of nationalism is dead as the dodo bird. So how do we get from where we are today, where nationalism is resurgent around the world in different places, because people are tired of the woke, progressive,
Right.
socialist lockdowns, the craziness that goes along with that. How does that fit into a Revelation 13? Does it mean like the end, it's gradually, then suddenly, or is nationalism somehow tied into the world government under the beast kingdom? How can that be co-opted into a
Yeah.
globalist system?
It happens through confederations, and I one of my opinions, and I just the opinion I hold that I think is something to watch is looking at what's going to take place with the UN, because right now the United States is the about a third of their income comes to the United States. And it's a corrupt organization, obviously. I mean, you've got a bunch of people that are just there because it's better than living in their home countries and they make more. So it's just like, it's just a joke. And that's where we're seeing the whole alliance or alignment of nations and leaders shifting so quickly, because even they recognized that they had a man with severe dementia followed by a dodo bird uh, who was going to take, one European leader said when Kamala went over to warn the Russians not to invade, and he said, if she kicks over, we are all in serious trouble. So in many ways, you find that there's a collective sigh of relief that at least there's somebody who says what he means and means what he says, and has proven himself to be not really an extremist as they try to picture him. Saying all of that, I think that there's going to come really an accountability within the United Nations. And I still think that the United Nations may, in fact, be the framework behind that, because when I talk about the Security Council, which is made up of 5 permanent members and 5 permanent regions, you can look at that as 5 as being 10 different nations, or you could say basically this is a conglomeration of these nations and regions. You have these large, powerful nations, and then you have these regions that all have representatives. And it gets this idea of we keep our national identity, but we all begin to cooperate. And I think that's really where the guys like Soros get it all wrong. His idea is get rid of nations and go to city states and operate everything as one world government. It's just not pragmatic. People cling to their national identity because it's familiar. I like America because I've lived in America. Also, I like America because I've been in other places in the world. I still like America a lot better. But it's the idea that people have this sense of their identity. Patriotism can be its own kind of religion, if you will, for people. And so that's really what I keep my eye on when I'm looking at the events. I really am curious to see how Trump deals with the UN, because he's going to have to. It's out of control. It's a mess. He controls the purse strings. He's already said the World Health Organization needs to be shut down and brought to and be gone, because they're so corrupt and there's he said, we pay for it and they do what China tells them. So I think they're going to see some really, I think this is part of the strategic plan that Trump is going to do something with the United Nations, but I think it's going to create this dynamic where a one world government can begin to form. You can maintain your national identities, but you become suddenly this conglomerate that has more authority, more because it's more supported. And at the end of the day, many leaders in the UN right now, the people who are in charge right now, Guterres and the rest of these guys, are trying to get rid of the veto. They really want to get rid of the Security Council and bring it down to just a straight democratic vote, simply because small nations want power and they don't have any power to speak of. So they make resolutions that nobody pays attention to. So I just think that there's going to be something. I think that's going to be the structure, and I think it's going to be changed pretty dramatically. I mean, it was created in a meeting in San Francisco in 1946. Same thing can happen. They could simply transform it and make it into something that will be more a vehicle for one world government. And I think most people will slip by normally, because most diabolical plans make sense at the moment. People look at it and say, well, that's reasonable, that's sensible. It's that incrementalism that they change little by little. And, at the end of the day, we're always caught by surprise saying, how did we get here? How did we end up in this place? I mean, it's like Democrats are trying to figure that out right now. How did we become this institution of crazy people, and the only reason they care about it is because they want power and they want prosperity. They want to be rich, and so. But beyond that, I think it's going to be interesting to watch. That's why I always tell people, just focus on some of these things. Keep track of these things, because I think they're going to happen incrementally. It's not the big things that happen out here that everybody sees. I think it's oftentimes these little tiny steps that don't even get covered by the news. And when you realize how short the news cycle is, my wife said to me the other day, what happened to the drones? Where it was 24/7, and suddenly you don't hear anything about the drones. We're talking about Jimmy Carter passing, which, by the way, I don't mean to dish on Carter, but he was the least effective president we had prior to Biden. And he was a great guy, but a person in many ways, but he wasn't a guy who could make decisions. He wasn't a strategic thinker. He was a micromanager, and he was a true nuclear engineer. He was a micromanager. He cared about the details, but couldn't see the big picture. And I think that, at the end of the day, we find that, well, I was on a flight recently, and I saw on the documentaries, I'll go look at the documentaries. They have 3, on Delta Airlines, they have 3 documentaries on the life of Jimmy Carter. I thought, this guy, I was alive. I mean, I was a working guy when Carter was in office. And I tell you what, we couldn't get rid of him fast enough because it was insane. I mean, the country was falling apart. The nation it was so similar to Biden, except Biden has one upped him. I think the best thing that happened to Jimmy Carter was for Biden to come along, because he's no longer the worst president of the 20th century. But saying all of that, I think that again, these things move so quickly anymore, but I do think that this is my own opinion, that I think the UN is going to be a focal point, because the vehicle is there. It's kind of like, you want to get someplace and you look around, what's the most convenient vehicle to do what I want to do? And you pick the one, whether it's a pickup or it's a Honda or it's a Mini Cooper, whatever you think is going to be the best vehicle to get you where you want. And I think that if I were to look at it right now and saying, I really want to see the globalist government come, that would be the United Nations. Most people don't realize that the World Economic Forum and the United Nations have entered into a compact about 4 years ago to begin working together towards developing this one world governmental system. And that's the thing. I think that we look at the World Economic Forum, you have to realize that it's representative of the most powerful, wealthiest, influential governments, corporations, and across the board. And I think that's probably why Trudeau was trying to figure out how he ended up where he's at, because he was viewed as one of their upcoming stars. So anyway, that's a lot of blather. So I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but that's the chaos that reigns in my mind.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think coming up, at least in the first year or maybe the first 2 years of his administration, should the Lord tarry, I think that the Trump will definitely divorce from the United Nations. That will cause the United Nations to relocate to some other place, presumably back in the Middle East or somewhere back in the old world. And then also even the threat of divorce with NATO in his first term has caused European countries to become very introspective about their own self-defense and get serious about standing up their own military force. And certainly since 22, since Russia invaded Ukraine, I think that Europeans have begun to take the idea of their own European EU defense force way more seriously. So I definitely think that Trump's nationalism is forcing Europe to finally grow up, or finally to rise up to, they'll be forced into the position of the world's last standing superpower
Yeah,
after the rapture and after the Gog and Magog conflict concludes. And they will be that Roman Empire 2.0, whatever you want to call it, 3.0 version going forward. And I also think that the EU, I've said this a lot of times, but the EU will rebrand itself, because right now they sound like a bureaucracy. And I think that if everything is about branding these days, and it seems like if they want to get the young people on board with their military, which they'll need to have the world's best military force, at that time, what sounds more inviting to a young, jobless, unemployed European 20-year-old, the new Roman army, or European Union Defense Force, whatever. I don't know. I kind of see it playing out that way, that the old ways are starting to make their way back, because they've come back into vibe
yeah,
in in a very retro way. But I think that they will absolutely try to rebrand themselves as some
yeah,
type of reinvention of the Roman Empire, especially if the Union for the Mediterranean, if that economic slash geopolitical organization, if that ever comes back into vogue, I think between that and the EU, you have the Roman Empire right there. I mean, that's exactly the same boundaries of the Roman Empire. So,
well,
and the Union for the Mediterranean is one of the only geopolitical organizations that has Israel in it, as well as
yeah,
Muslim nations. And a lot of people don't talk about it, but that was something that Sarkozy began back in, I think it
yeah,
began back in 1995, but I think it officially launched in 2005. The last time I checked a few months ago, it was still active. They don't
yeah,
make a lot of news because they're focused on infrastructure. They're focused on things like water, clean water, solar power, all the green initiative stuff. But it's also a lot of like just basic sustenance, like how do we get clean water to these communities? And so I think
yeah,
once Israel is done with their area beautification project they're doing right now, getting rid of Hamas, getting rid of Hezbollah, increasing the border distance there in Syria, and as well as I think what will happen in 2025 and 2026 is the annexation of Judea and Samaria. Because right now there's no way that Israel can have there's a two-state solution is impossible when you have three different parties involved. You
Yeah.
have Israel, then you have the Palestinian Authority that's based in the West Bank area, what they call the West Bank, and then you have Hamas down in Gaza. And there's three different political entities that none of them recognize each other as a legitimate authority. So I think what will happen with the Palestinian issue is that they'll combine them. They'll have to condense them down to one location. So either they condense everybody down to the Gaza Strip and maybe expand it or do something with it, but that frees up all of the West Bank and the Judea Samaria area. They can relocate those, and then the Palestinians will finally be their own singular government authority that's going to be managed by some type of UN or US slash Israeli uh,
Yeah.
peacekeeping forces or something. There'll be a solution for that, but right now you can't have a two-state solution when you have three different political entities involved. So it's impossible. They're going to have to annex the Judea and Samaria area. They have to, or they're never going to be able to fully secure Jerusalem, which seems to be the goal of HTS, of Turkey, of Iran, of all these other groups. They all want to march and take over Jerusalem. And right now, Jerusalem sits right on the edge of that contested area, the annexed areas, uh, annexed from 1967. But the Jordanians had annexed it prior. I mean, they annexed all of that area in 1950. So up until from 1950 to 1967, that was all Jordanian area. But here's something, and I know a lot of people, not you or not necessarily people in this chat or anything like that, but a lot of pundits and a lot of media figures and politicians will act like right now that Jordan's been there for millennia. They act like all these countries in that area are way older than Israel. And when you look at all the dates of when these countries actually came online in the 20th century, I mean they're all around the same time. So Egypt ended British colonialism in 1922. Turkey was converted to the Turkish Republic that it is now in 1923. 1932, Saudi Arabia came on. They unified the seven kingdoms there. 1943, Lebanon became a country. 1944, Syria became a country. 1946, Jordan became a country. 1947, Egypt, and this is when the UK withdrew to the Suez Canal area. And then 1948 was Israel, and then 1960 was Cyprus. So Israel's not even the newest country that was established or
Right.
reestablished in the Middle East. And so right now, the media, everybody's throwing fits because Israel took over, 20, 40 kilometers of that border with Syria, which includes a lot of communities that want to be part of Israel, the Druze and
Hmm.
Christians and others that don't fit in with the Sunni HTS model of, basically the Syrian version of ISIS. They don't want to be under that. They know what happened the last
Yeah.
time. So what's crazy to me is that you have only six countries that have their embassies in Jerusalem, which is a stable democracy in the Middle East. Uh, and they won't move their embassies there to the legitimate capital of Israel. Yet you have like five or six European superpowers that are lobbying right now with HTS to move their embassies into Damascus, and they're doing this while the banner basically of ISIS is flying over Damascus. They're really willing to open up their embassies and re-engage with the leadership there. That blows my mind that they are so the anti-Semitism is so far gone in a lot of these leadership circles that they absolutely refuse to deal with Israel, but they'll deal with a terrorist organization that is killing their people right now in the streets of Europe, all over Europe.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to come to a head. I think the reality will set in. Israel will eliminate the threats with Hamas and Hezbollah. They'll annex this portion of Syria. I think they'll end up annexing all of the West Bank or the what they call the West Bank, and then Israel's going to be in a very, very good place with the security wise in their national security, and they may feel safe, and that's where we see the Gog Magog thing kick in with these
Yeah.
other countries that come against Israel.
Yeah.
Um, last question here for you, because we've gone long and I still have other questions I need to answer. What do you see in terms of like black swan events or just anything crazy for 2025? We know it's going to be the pace of things is going to continue to get crazier and crazier, but just, thinking out loud, what would you think would be something that would be completely unexpected aside from the rapture? Like we know that that can happen at any point. But where do you see things going in 2025?
I
Uh,
think I
uh,
think 25 is actually going to be a real time of resurgence in terms of the U.S. economy. Basically, when you look at economics, I mean, economics is really about the flow of currency, flow of money and assets, and where it always goes where it's going to be most profitable. And Trump understands that, and so he's going to attract. He's already attracting a lot of economic might, and basically, as Bill Clinton said during his election, first run for office, it's the economy's stupid. And I think that that's one of the things, like we talk about one world government and all this thing. I see his Trump's move towards cryptocurrency and endorsing that, and suddenly people who were bailing out of cryptocurrency now because of Biden's regulations now are jumping back into it and even expanding it. And of course, I think that central digital currency for our own country is just something that's just an idea that's waiting to happen. And so I think that we're going to see that a lot of things are going to be, again, people are going to feel so positive about the direction of country, what their own personal wealth, income, and lifestyle are, that the things that are going to be most significant are probably going to go fairly unnoticed. I mean, I don't anticipate, not that I ever have, some major cataclysmic thing that can happen, but it all depends on how badly God wants to get mankind's attention. And one of the things I think when you talk about a lot of these European leaders, I mean, socialism has always been a bad idea. It's never worked well. But something about Satan, he has the ability. Satan can make people stupid, and it's just amazing to me how that. These people, many of them are just one-trick ponies. This is all they know how to do. So I think there's going to be some major, as you're saying, major shifts around the world in terms of orientation of politics, of national governments, a move towards not even conservatism, because I don't know that the Trump administration is going to be all that conservative. I think they're going to be more common sense. They don't want to say anything about abortion. They don't. A lot of issues that are really big for me, like abortion, is one of those things I tell people. Do you think God's just winking at that and not paying attention? You kill 65 million babies, and God's just kind of like, oh well, just because it doesn't reach the news. I was mentioning to my wife. I said, I see these advertisements for the Humane Society saying that for $19.95 a month, I can support and save the life of a dog, but it's against the law to put that same kind of commercial about saving the life of a baby. So you can't. They won't allow you to run that on TV, but you can save a dog, but you can't save a baby. And it's like you realize there's this displacement, this confusion of values, that the whole idea of the echo chamber, which was actually a Obama Axelrod term, creating the echo chamber where people keep on hearing the same thing over and over again, and they conform to it because it's the common thing you hear. It's the narrative that is common and people subscribe to it. So I think I just see that the prosperity is kind of the carrot that draws people into something where they don't. I see even the church doesn't really care. Well, how they put it, we because January is coming up, we always focus on the issue of abortion in our church. And one of the leaders of one of our groups here said to me that pastors don't even want to let them talk about their ministry because they said our people have abortion fatigue. And I thought, that's an interesting phrase, abortion fatigue. But the idea is what happens is people just stop focusing on the things that I think are most critically important to the kingdom of God. And they start focusing on basically kitchen table issues of work and food and so forth. And if the economy's good, then I'm happy, and I'll not worry about whatever happens. I think if Trump does something really outrageous, most people say, well, it doesn't really matter because he's really fixed the economy. and he's fixing the border.
Yeah.
He's taking care of those things. So, and so, like I say, I voted for Trump both times. I voted for him 3 times, and given the options, and that's what I think people lose sight of. Given the options, who else are you going to vote for? And some people say, "Well, I'm not going to vote at all," which I say is then that's 2 votes for the other guy. But at the same time, uh, I don't. I've even seen godly men make really bad decisions.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I also agree with your previous statement about that the time that God has is not necessarily fixed. There are certain things that are fixed, like the binding of the loosening of the angels under the river Euphrates. It says they were set for a time, a year, month, and day that they would be held there. So there are certain markers I think that are already fixed in time. How much, I guess, the wiggle room that we get as a nation depends on whether we repent as a nation or even a significant portion of us do. And then that cuts into like the gap time, right? The gap when the rapture would actually that starts in the actual official start of the 70th week. And so I think there was a little bit of time built in there for that. I have a bunch of questions here from the audience
Yeah,
that we get collected. I don't know if you want to if you've got enough time to hang out to do some of those.
sure.
But okay, this is from Paula Compton. Question: Why must we have a long gap of time between the election day and the inauguration? It seems like a very vulnerable time for our nation. Um, I know the answer to that. I don't know if you want to go at
Let's
it
say
or not.
when the Constitution was written, it was how long it took people to get from one place to another. So,
Yeah,
unlike today, where we can do it immediately, that's really the only explanation. And the
yeah,
point is that people say, then why don't we change it? Well, this is always a problem for conservatives. We don't like it when people want to start messing with the Constitution because where are they going to stop? And that's really
yeah,
why, it's yeah. I agree with her. It doesn't make sense until you realize that that's how long it took from somebody to get from Savannah, Georgia, to Philadelphia or Washington D.C. or someplace else.
yeah. By horse, or you have to wait for letters to go out, or
Yeah,
if you're in California and you got to
yeah.
get the results. They wouldn't have had California back then, but even in the colonies, the 13 colonies, to get from one end of the colonies to the other is on
Well,
horse would take
California's still
weeks.
counting. California's still
Yeah.
counting.
All right. This is from Kathy. She asked, "What is the purpose of the 1,000-year millennium? Because after a perfect environment, there will be such a huge rebellion trying to fight God."
Mhm.
I have I've heard it described as the front porch of eternity. I've heard it described that is going to be given man the perfect environment, man that still has a sin nature, and God is just saying, even with the perfect environment, you're still going to mess it up. I
Mhm.
don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that there are people who survive the tribulation, but aren't saved. And I think when we talk about the kings of the east coming against the Antichrist, and so forth, and I think it's God's long-suffering desire to see people saved. Um, the only explanation that makes sense to me is that everything God does ultimately is to increase the kingdom of God, to see more people saved. And I think that this has to be part of that plan. It's like anything else. Once we're there, it'll make perfect sense to us, but it's just simply stated factually. But I think you're right in that regard that God is going to give men an opportunity. He's going to create a perfect environment for them. And, and I think it shows that everything goes well until Satan is released. And part of the thing that's really a mystery to all of us who study scripture is this almost this drama that God is allowing to play out with Satan. He certainly could have eliminated Satan ultimately in a moment, but I think there's something profoundly important in the heart of God to people freely choose for themselves to be followers of Jesus. And that's the only thing I can think of makes reasonable sense is that it's another opportunity for these multitudes to come to a saving relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah, as I totally agree with that. Um, you also kind of look at it too that if the time we're in is modeling the days of creation, so you
Mhm.
have 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham, 2000 from Abraham to Jesus' first coming, 2000 to the second coming. If that ends up being, then that is also setting the not the foreshadowing, but the typology of the 6 days of
Right.
creation, the seventh day being the Sabbath day of rest. So there's a 1,000-year day of rest for creation and for mankind. But it's also probably filling multiple things, Old Testament
Yeah.
prophecies, the creation day model, the opportunity for billions to come to know the Lord and be saved. Because you got to think, I mean, I think the world population during the millennial kingdom is going to be in the neighborhood of 10 billion plus. I mean, it's going to be a huge
Yeah.
number of people that are born into this time. But I don't understand the rebellion at the end or how long the little season is at the end. Um,
Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
think we really, when we talk about these things, we're really wrestling with this tension that exists between the omniscient, the omnipotent power of God. God knows everything; He is all powerful, and yet He has given man. He is sovereign Lord, and yet He's given to mankind a degree of sovereignty where we can choose to reject His love. I mean, that staggers me, and I think that, of course, there's huge theological splits over that. But I think that's the problem, is what oftentimes we're trying to reconcile in our minds something that is only conceivable in the mind of God. And so, yeah, we make guesses at saying, well, I think it's going to be for this reason. But God always amazes me with how much more brilliant He is than we are. It's like the plan of God is just it's that great word is ineffable. It's ineffable. You can't. It's not possible for us to even get our minds around it.
I agree. I agree. Well, it's better late than never, Sherry. I'm glad you could make it. Um, all right. Richard Browder asked the question. I heard there's a huge military buildup in China, according to Fox News, the biggest since 1930. Will China do something before Trump gets in? And I talked about that earlier.
Mhm.
I personally think that uh, they've made it very well known that China believes that the 21st century is the century of the Middle Kingdom, or whatever they call themselves, the
Yeah,
Kingdom of Heaven. And I think they also realize that by 2050, they are going to be in a very far worse position than they are right now in terms of the gentrification of the population, the what do they call it? Not the genocide, but basically the genocide of a half of the Chinese population, the females, the
yeah,
infanticide that they did for X number of decades with the one child policy has now left millions and tens of millions of Chinese men without the prospects of ever getting married.
yeah,
And I've talked about this before. There's a huge movement inside of China with the young Generation Z folks. They call it Bailan. It means let it rot. So they're just
yeah.
going to do the bare minimum
Quiet quit.
that they have to do. So
Quiet. Yeah, the quiet quit.
they have no future, no hopes. They're like, all right, well, I'm not going to really try anymore. I'm not even going to have kids. I'm not going to do my best at anything. And there's not really anything the government can to do to change that other than you know crack the
Well,
whip even more. But that's just going to make it worse for the government and
yeah,
delegitimize their authority. So what do you know about China's buildup? I frankly I think that they're coming to the realization they're going to have to do something sooner rather than later to preserve their
yeah.
future.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they play the long game and saying we'll wait till Trump's gone, or whether they decide we need to strike now. Part of what I think we'll see as a precursor to any kind of armed conflict will be a cyber attack. I think that they have really, like you talk about Stuxnets, they put that into our phone systems. They put it into all of our sites. I mean, we're they when they tell us 9 telecom companies have all been penetrated with this software that'll sabotage our systems. And they've been testing it and trying to see how it works, and it's working pretty well. So when you talk about an imp explosion or any of the things of that nature, I think that we can be ground to such a halt so quickly by interfering with these kind of things, and that's why Trump's rhetoric is so strong and threatening. Don't you dare, because he knows it can turn the whole apple cart over. But I think it's really a part of this whole on the political side or the governmental side, geopolitical side. It's a calculation. and we don't know how. I don't know how they're adding up the figures on the page, but ultimately, Satan is inspiring. He inspires chaos, confusion, destruction, war, and death, and carnage. He loves that, and the only thing that restrains him is the hand of God. And so I think that for me, it comes back to the fact that the future is really in God's hands, and we need to become increasingly aware of it. I think that the church, that should be the church's message, instead of just simply saying, well, we need to love everybody. I don't disagree that we need to love everybody. It doesn't say you have to like everybody. It just says I don't have to love them. But it's just it's this whole idea that I think what's missing. I thought what's really struck me was in Revelation 14 when the first angel goes out and he spreads the everlasting gospel, and the first words out of the everlasting gospel mouth is fear God. Judgment is coming, and I think that that's a part of the gospel that we don't hear being spoken very much anymore. The Jonathan Edwards idea of sinners in the hands of an angry God. Well, that, he'd be kicked off the pulpit within 20 minutes, 10 minutes, if he tried to preach a sermon like that today. And yet it was the catalyst, we believe, for the Great Awakening. So I just feel myself that I've really started, even in my own preaching, really focusing on the fact that people don't come to Christ if they don't fear God. They come to a genie that they think is going to fix all their problems, but they don't come to Christ. There's not a brokenness. And I think that it's when I realized that how horribly sinful I am by nature, and that it's that I was an object of God's wrath until I came into the relationship with Jesus Christ. So I think that's part of it. As I look at those events and I think, I don't know how that's going to tip, because I think it can happen very quickly and in very significant ways before we all even know what happened. For all I know, that Fox News will go dark and there'll be no TV and there'll be no internet, there'll be nothing to communicate with, and suddenly we're sitting there going, so what is going on? Until Xi Jinping, moves to Spokane. I don't know. It's like, what? I mean, this kind of stuff happens, and I just think that there just needs to be this realization that ultimately it's in God's hands. And we need to be like the Ninevites, who are really falling on our face and crying out for God's mercy. He gave them an extra 100 years. Now, like you say, God knows the time. He's got everything locked because he knows how we're going to react, but he gives us the opportunity to react, which is something that's beyond my pay grade.
Yeah. And I, like I said at the outset of this, I said there's two kinds of people that when you present information to them, they either dismiss it out of hand, or they over sensationalize it to the point that it's built up to such a degree that it becomes meaningless when nothing happens, and it just causes people to push further away. So I guess to that particular question, I'm of the mind that China will do something sooner rather than later. I don't know if they want to wait out 4 years with Trump and then another 4 to 8 with JD Vance, who seems like the presumptive follow on for him. So are they looking to wait 12 years out? I don't know, but
it took them
they have a small window of time now.
It took them years to groom Biden. I mean, really, they groomed him way back. I mean, they've been grooming him for years, and I think that was their long play. And part of, even like you go back to Bill Clinton, it was covered up very quickly. But the money stream that was coming for China into his campaign is something that just never gets addressed because he got elected and was in power. But they do tend to play the long game. But how like I say, I don't know how they view that. Your guess, my guess, I hope it's not soon. I'm a wimp. I want to get raptured. I don't want to get blown apart. I don't want to be under a despotic government. But God knows.
I think even from the military perspective, like a lot of veterans were that had retired or got into the military, had joined the ranks to go to Ukraine, and only being there just a matter of weeks were ready to leave. They're like, I don't want any part of this. Like, that's how terrifying it was. And although I've deployed 3 times to combat zone, I don't consider that war, even though it was called the War on Terror. I consider, I mean, it was a combat deployment, but that wasn't like World War II war. That wasn't like Vietnam, even, where, the height of the Vietnam War, every single day, you know, you had 500 body bags coming home of U.S. soldiers. I think, like, in terms of when we fight a war against China or Russia, it is going to be so cataclysmic that there's really not anything that we have, even going back to World War II, that's going to compare to it because of the advances in technology. And like you mentioned, I mean, an EMP thing, if that happened over the US and everybody is instantly, this broadcast goes dark, your cell phone doesn't work, the internet's not working, people are going to be freaking out. And I
Yeah.
think that um, we keep that as a black swan event that could happen.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly, it's something that we need to be prepared for in the event that something like that were to occur. But I think we base that against the Bible and look where does this line up with Scripture and how Scripture says things are going to turn out.
Yeah.
Which is like, for instance, like I've never gotten all wrapped up in the environmental movement, even though I think we need to be good stewards of the earth. I'm
Right.
not going all Greta Thunberg on, my audience because they still drink out of plastic straws and stuff. Like I mean, like, because I know the Bible, according to Genesis, was it 8 or 9, that as long as the earth is going to continue as long as God keeps it going.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
we're not going to die because of some random comet that hits the earth, or because the earth ozone layer disappears, or because the ocean level goes up an inch or whatever. Like, I'm not worried about those because God shows us in the future that there's still nations are still functioning
Yeah.
systems and stuff in the future to us. So I don't have to lose my mind in fear over that kind of stuff because I know what the Bible says. Here's here's Mr. Pocketful of Steel. His question, Pete, what is your opinion of on Steve Bannon, specifically him personally and then politically? How much do you think he has when it comes to getting in Trump's ear? I don't know a whole lot about Bannon other than him politically. I know that he is a believer in Jesus. I think he probably aligns more under the post-trib or post-millennial eschatology, kind of along the same vein as Alex Jones. But I do believe he's a believer, and I think that his brand of political thinking is not far from the core of the conservative values in terms of that. But um, I don't know how much influence. I'm assuming he still has quite a bit of influence with Trump. I mean, he's been with Trump since before 2016, so
Yeah.
he's been faithful, and that's what Trump seems to really the one quality that anybody can possess that impresses Trump the most is loyalty. Have
Hmm.
they been loyal to him through thick and thin? And regardless of their own personal idiosyncrasies and whatever things that may be annoying to him, if they stayed loyal to him, I think they sit higher on he's going to listen to him. So I think Bannon is one of those guys, and he went to jail for refusing to go along with a subpoena from the J6 committee. So I think he still has a lot of political sway. I don't know a lot about him personally. I
Yeah.
liked what he said in the past, even before 2016. So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on him, or do you
Well,
know anything about him?
I probably knows about as much as you do, but I think your analysis is correct that Trump values loyalty, and he what's different about him is he gives an ear to the people that he trusts. He may not he makes an independent decision, but he really listens to what other people like Bannon would have to say. And so I'm sure that Bannon still has a great deal of influence. And he just became kind of radioactive during the whole, you know, Russia collusion thing like that. And so, for political reasons, Trump isn't going to, hold him up and say, here he is, and this is one of my close advisors. But at the same time, I think that he's somebody that Trump does listen to very carefully. People like Peter Navarro and Bannon and stuff like that. I mean, these guys, they put their whole lives, their careers, everything, their own personal resources on the line to be loyal to Trump. And I think that, again, Trump recognizes that and he doesn't he will support them regardless. So
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Here's Tegano or Tego Arcana die. What do you make of Musk reasserting forcefully and foul-mouthed himself on government policy? Will Musk eventually become a thorn in Trump's side? I personally think he will be, but
Mhm.
I think it may be to the point that I think he kind of already has a little bit because Trump made that statement a while back that that Musk is hanging out at Mar-a-Lago all the time. He can't get rid of him. So I kind of think if something were to happen to Trump, uh, health whatever, I think that Musk could step in as a VP candidate for Vance.
Yeah,
I don't know, but I think Musk ends up in the Revelation 13 scenario somehow, some way, because of everything he's tied in with. He's building the infrastructure basically for the beast kingdom. I'm not saying he's the beast or he's the antichrist or anything like that. I'm just saying that he seems to be laying all the groundwork for, especially like Starlink, to have internet service everywhere in the planet where connectivity is everywhere. So
yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, I think that it's let me come from a whole different direction. I think that this is really the long-term impact of the evolution narrative. Because if you have an evolutionary worldview that man self-created and everything is evolving to higher and higher levels, which across the board, I mean, guys like Musk and everybody does, transhumanism is just part of that whole thinking process. You have people who just will not have any kind of normal limitations. In other words, we look at certain things and say that's outside of the boundaries of what God wills, and therefore God calls it perverted abomination, so forth and so on. Musk, I think, is very pragmatic, and he realizes that much of what he was embracing brought personal hardship and pain to him. I mean, his own personal life is a rolling train wreck, but I mean, in terms of, it's like marriages and kids and the whole thing like that. And so, but I think again, it's very, very pragmatic. And I think that's part of the problem with the evolutionary worldview. It turns everything into a pragmatic problem that I can create and I can fix and I can solve. And there's not an idea of submitting myself to the order which God has placed upon the universe. So I think that, and Musk, because of his basically his autistic way of looking at the world, I think he's one of those autistic geniuses who is able to just focus on something for so long. You and I get exhausted. He continues to look at it for days and days and days until he comes up with a solution. That kind of genius is hard to keep in a bottle. And when you're trying to navigate a political agenda, Musk is going to be challenging because he's going to say what he thinks. I think if Trump creates an environment where people are able to have their own opinion, but at the end of the day, they realize he's the boss and he makes the decision, then I think it's okay. But where you get in trouble is when somebody like that is so convinced that you're wrong that they'll do anything to oppose you. And I think Robert Kennedy's the same kind of ilk. I think you can run into the same type of thing with him. He's so fixed on what needs to happen and that he can hit a point of, it's almost interesting. We admire these people because they won't compromise, but sometimes they need to compromise because it's not their call. And they have a lot of trouble seeing the distinction in those lines.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Totally agree. I got a few more questions. I've already can't turned the questions off. These are pretty. Some of these are pretty straightforward. Let's see where were we? Okay. Melody Phillips, question: is it legal to put Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy into position of power being handed over to them? I think if they serve in the role of the advisor, some kind of advisory committee, that's totally within the bounds. They're going to
Yeah.
simply do reports on these different agencies and show how much they're wasting and just present that data to Trump, and Trump's going to be the one that okay, we need to,
Well,
here's the solution for the department of this or that.
yeah. Ultimately, it's Congress. Congress controls the spending. And so if Congress follows their advice, but they don't really have that decision-making process. So that's kind of the media is kind of misrepresenting their positions because all they are is an advisory board.
Yep. Next question, Diane Williams. According to the U.S. Constitution, you have to have a Speaker of the House to certify the election. Right now, that is in question. They may have to postpone the certification. Thoughts? As far as I
Um,
know, the Speaker of the House doesn't have to even be a member of Congress. It can be anybody. So I don't think having a speaker fill the role
no, yeah, you're
is going to
absolutely right.
slow that down.
You're absolutely right. Anybody can be appointed to be a speaker. The president can appoint somebody to be speaker. The House can elect anybody to be the speaker. But you know, I've seen Republicans do stupid things in the past, so I wouldn't put it past them to do something really stupid. But it serves everybody's interest, at least on the Republican side of the room, who has the majority, to make sure that the election is certified. So, yeah, that would be surprising.
Here's a two-part question, and this is from Vindog Radio. Hey, Vindog. I'm going to read them together because they're connected. He says, question, North America will be one of the heads of the revived Roman Empire. And then he says, with the talks of Canada becoming the 51st state, and I would even add Greenland to this equation, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe Panama Canal. Do you think that would go towards building a 10 world or 10 region world confederacy or whatever? I kind of think it does, because I've always viewed the North American continent as being, they'll just kind of put us together as one region, kind of like what they've been wanting to do with NAFTA and all that. But
Yeah.
basically, you have one region and you may have like two kings, right? One on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, and they kind of rule underneath the guise of the Antichrist, but they're kind of like those, like Pontius Pilate was a ruler over a particular region in Jesus' day, yet he wasn't the emperor. You know what I mean? Like these are going to
Right.
be like these kings that serve underneath. So I don't know. What do you think about Canada, and I would even add Greenland to this?
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. I think that Kevin O'Leary made the comment. I don't know if you know, he's a big investment guy, but he was a Shark Tank guy. But he was saying that he saw the benefit in creating a free trade zone, basically removing the border barriers, pushing them out to the ends of Canada, and allowing basically the economies to free flow and suddenly meld together. Because you know, one of our top trading partners is Ontario, and I think something like a third of our trade comes out just to that one country. So I mean, that one nation state within Canada. So you might see parts of Canada pulling out and wanting to join with America. But I think one of the things, when we talk about the revived Roman Empire, what we have to understand, I think, is that all of Western civilization is really grew out of the Roman cultural, political, governmental system. So I mean, we are Roman more than we are anything. Our founding fathers certainly called America the New Rome, because they envisioned the Roman Republic, not the empire, but the Republic, and they fashioned our governmental systems after that. But when you look at the amount of, even how much of our language comes from Latin, and how many of our cultural principles and values and so forth, it's kind of amazing when you think about all of this, that it's not that we're not that far away. Because when most of the Western world, and that's really, we have the Eastern world and we have the Western world who are kind of in conflict, with two different very philosophies, but they all basically, the Western world embraces, Western civilization embraces everything that was Roman.
Totally agree. In Allison here, I like the quote she has. I think the way we could see this play out is if there is some kind of currency crisis that we've talked about earlier.
Mhm.
You have JD Vance and even Trump being big proponents of crypto and stuff. I think the solution will be some type of a digital system, whether it's not necessarily a central bank digital currency, but it's like a central bank digital currency that still somehow protects anonymity, etc. But the thing about the Amero, that makes a lot of sense to me, that because if you had the US dollar collapse, or even if you had artificial intelligence become even more have a more profound impact into the American economy by replacing particular jobs, etc., eventually they're going to have to introduce the universal basic income. They're going to have to introduce UBI to keep people afloat in the interim until some new system is put in place. But UBI then necessitates a digital type of currency that is put either on a card or put directly into your account, deposit
Yeah.
into your account. And then that, kind of like a stimulus check was in 2020, UBI would then become this payment that everybody gets regardless, presumably if you're not working. And then that helps you pay your bills, get groceries, etc. But then that may morph into a Amero currency, which I still think Amero is very much in play.
Mhm.
because the U.S. dollar. I mean, we're at 36 trillion in debt, and the 100 trillion with unfunded liabilities. I mean, I mean, they could go through all the government waste, and let's say by June or whatever the time frame that Trump gave them to get I think it was by the 2-year mark of his
Yeah.
presidency, to come up with a solution of getting rid of all this wasteful spending. Even if we did that, even if we balanced our budget and got rid of all the waste, etc., the rest of the world is moving on to digital currency. Are we going to be the last country using paper currency? I
Yeah.
mean, everybody else is, and so at a certain point, we're going to have to convert over to the rest of the system that everybody else uses.
Well,
So I don't know.
the whole reason Trump is pushing for the cryptocurrency right now is because they calculate that they can reduce the federal deficit by $16 trillion by simply moving assets into cryptocurrency. And so I don't understand how that works. Even people I talk to who are big into cryptocurrency tell me they don't really know how it works. They're just making a ton of money. But that's everything is going digital. Whatever we call it, whatever the name ends up being, whatever it looks like, it's just inevitable. It's just inevitable because we're kind of there already. I mean, how much cash do you carry in your pocket when you go to the store? I mean, I use credit cards, and I've told people like this. You go overseas. I used to get cashier's checks. I did currency exchange, so forth. I use a credit card in any country in the world, and I get the best exchange rate possible. Plus, it's immediate. And if I get home and find out somebody tried to steal something, I can have it canceled. So it's just the idea that we are so digitized already. We're already operating in a digital currency. And I had to buy a part for something today, and my wife said, "Well, let me order on Amazon. It'll be here tomorrow." That's good. I just you just look at this and you go, we
My
use
drone.
digital communication, digital, yeah. Well, what do we find out is all those drones over in New Jersey are late Christmas packages. I don't know. I mean, it's yeah, it's and I think that every idea that people put out there has credibility because we know it's going to come in some kind of form, and that's again for decades I've been telling people just watch the direction of digital currency. It's just coming. It's here. It's going to take over, and eventually it's going to eliminate the cost and inconvenience. I tell people all the time the idea of receiving a chip that helps me to do everything without having to do anything. I mean, it's so appealing. The convenience is there. Your car starts. You pay for things. The idea of the utter convenience. That's why I was sharing with my congregation. I said there's a triad of things that lead to the ultimate combination. One is that you worship the beast as God. The second thing is that you bow down in front of his image, and the third part is that you receive the mark. Those things together is really what sends people to hell. And so I said, so don't be afraid to use your credit card. Now, the problem is don't use your credit card the way the government uses its credit card, or you'll have it taken from you very quickly. But yeah, I think those are rational thoughts.
All right. Stephen W. asked, question. I've heard Steve Cicolante, Discover Ministries. I'm not sure if you know who that is. Teach that the first seal of Revelation 6 was the coronavirus because corona means crown in Spanish, and thinks the third seal kicks in around 2027. I'm vaguely familiar with this Chief Cicolante guy. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he is Seventh-day Adventist in some form or fashion. And SDA, those guys have a weird eschatology because, you know, theoretically they were, I mean, not theoretically, realistically they were founded because of a failed prophecy because of the Millerite movement. And I can't remember the lady's name, but Ellen White
Ellen G.
broke
White.
off, and instead of correcting herself, they take this error and they keep running with it. And so now, I forget the term. Is it called it's where you try to put the current event things into prophecy, where you're trying to make them fit into Bible prophecy. I forget the exact term of it, but
Yeah, I can't.
I don't see that at all. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it's similarity doesn't make sameness. So you play this word game and you make this association, and then suddenly you extrapolate out of that. There's a whole lot of other passages, scriptures that aren't being addressed. And I think that part of the problem with the whole issue of dealing with prophecy is the fact that you have to sensationalize it in order to continue to gain more and more audience. So it's the idea that you keep on coming up with more and more stuff, and sometimes there's just not a whole lot more to talk about. I mean, I can look at various things. There are things going on, but I find that so many times people are kind of coming out with something very sensational, so people will tune in and listen to what they have to say, and then they feed on each other's ignorance. Um, just the fact that you make this association of COVID and crown and this kind of thing, it's like that you can do that 1,000 ways. And that's when you're talking about Seventh-day Adventists, and that's what the Seventh-day Adventists did, is they arrived at the idea that you could use the numbering of different names to identify who the Antichrist is. Well, that's so flexible. You and I could be declared the Antichrist. I spent 2 years in a Seventh-day Adventist boarding school, my last 2 years of high school, because I was so well behaved at home. And here I'm a non-Christian. I'm thrown into their theology, and the last 2 years, what they study is their eschatology. And as a non-Christian, I'm reading Ellen G. White. She is, according to them, Ellen Gould White is the spirit of prophecy spoken of in Revelation 12. So they believe she is the spirit of prophecy, and she's an interesting person. We know now today that she plagiarized 90% of what she wrote. That and they say, well, the way they rationalize it, saying, well, plagiarism wasn't illegal in that time. So therefore it's not wrong. So stealing people's other stuff, claiming to be your own, even though it's not prosecutable as a legal offense, is no longer wrong. Well, the truth of the matter is, she was a lady who had some of her own mental problems, and they've built so much upon that. And I say that as someone who has a lot of family who were in the SDA church and are ex-SDA, because they came to a point of just saying this doesn't work. But aside from all of that, I'll probably get a lot of hate letters. I've had some of their leadership come to my church to talk to me about my positions, talking about them. So I don't apologize. But nonetheless, to say all of that, I think that's a stretch. I think it's really a big stretch.
I totally agree. And here, Pastor Ken's the last question. And this is, the more I think about it, you're the perfect person to answer this, being a former hippie and being a child of the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
Jason Garza asked, are we in the age of Aquarius?
Well, I'm not into astrology, and it's funny because if you look for a definition, you go online, look for a definition of the age of Aquarius, it's all over the board. I mean, there's all sorts of things from apocalyptic to paradise on earth. So even the definition or the use of that term is really kind of hard to speak of, and I think that it's not a biblical concept. I think we are I think the biblical term is we're living in the end times, and that I think you can apply. But yeah, we're the fifth dimension saying we are in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and whatever it is, I don't like it. But I don't think that holds any weight. I don't think astrology has any real cachet that we should be paying any attention to.
Yeah, I thought that was a great question to end it with. But okay, Pastor Ken, I'm gonna leave you with any kind of closing thoughts you have. Just before you go, I'll let you know, I'll put your show notes and links and stuff, or I'll put your links to your blog and then to your channel for your church, Spokane, Washington, or Calvary Chapel Spokane, and all that stuff will be in the show notes right underneath the title here, so people can reach you or reach out to you or watch your programs. I like watching your daily devotionals; are really good. I'm glad that other people have enjoyed them as well, as I've shared them in the past. I mean, just the right amount of length. I don't think I could do a devotional because I'm too long-winded. It'll just end up being like a 2-hour me blabbing on. You somehow managed to get it like right at about 20 minjust or so, and you're done. Like you're just like, I can't go any further. I gotta get.
I
So,
shoot for
all right.
10
Any
minutes.
closing thoughts?
Yeah, no, I just my exhortation to people, and it's redundant in a sense, but I think it's something we forget about, because Paul said to Timothy, he said, "You're a faithful minister of Jesus Christ if you bring the brethren into remembrance of these things." It's the things that we forget that get us in trouble, not the things that we don't know. I feel like God covers me graciously for things I don't know and I don't foresee and I don't know what's coming. I don't worry about the future. I worry about my heart and where I'm at in this moment in time. And the only way I can keep the garden of my soul weeded, if you will. I don't want to become that seed that gets choked off by the cares, affairs, deceitful riches, and the pleasures of this world and so forth in the parable of the sower that Jesus talked about. I want to be able to daily weed the garden of my heart. And I do that by reading the word. I do that every morning, have this time of just reading the scriptures for an hour or so. And I know some people say that's hard for me to do. I just say, find a time in your life where you can do it, where you can spend enough time getting away from the computer, the phone, and everything else, and just read the scriptures for yourself. Don't even do it digitally. Read it in the Bible itself, because it's a very different psychological, mental experience when you're reading it on paper than when you even watch it on the screen. But saying all of that, it's just start in Genesis and read to Revelation and then go back again. And I do that about 3 times a year. And I've been doing it for 55 years. And what happens is you find that your brain becomes rewired. You start thinking biblical and you start interpreting things in your life that are happening from a biblical perspective, instead of being overwhelmed by the narrative of the culture. Every culture has its narrative. Those narratives are popular. They're the echo chamber that Obama and Axelrod sought to create and led us down to where we're at today. And I think that we can counter that by creating a biblical narrative and sharing that with people, being very clear, because most people are desperate for clarity. And when they run into somebody who says, "Well, let me tell you what the Bible says," you're a cup of cold water to thirsty souls. But that can only happen by filling yourself regularly with heavy doses of the Word of God. Hydrate yourself with Scripture, and you'll be able to speak into the culture in ways that you never imagined.
Amen. Yeah. And let me add to that, the craziness that we're going to see going forward into 2025. I don't think it's going to let up any. I think like we mentioned earlier, it's going to get worse and worse. But we don't know the future personally, but we serve a God who does. And
Yeah,
in his word, he has laid out for us how to live in troubling times, how to live in unpredictable or perilous times, as Paul puts it. And I simple phrases that I use is like, lean into the storm, keep your head on a swivel, always kind of understanding your surroundings, not in a also in a just a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense too. Just this morning, my wife was showing me a Facebook thing of a kid that was friends with our oldest daughter, that he was in jail. They did a mugshot and stuff on it. And I talked to this kid many times before about needing to be careful with his life, because the minute that he graduates or turns 18 and he messes up, he is going to go to jail. And I've had all these conversations, and the human part of me wants to mock at him and laugh at him and say, "See, I told you that guy's a loser," or whatever. But the spiritual, immediately I felt compelled, like I need to pray for this guy. I need to go figure out a way to visit him in jail and see if I can't still reach him. And so I
yeah.
think that we need to be sensitive to those kinds of things. And not that everybody here needs to walk around, like a pious priest and always kind of. All right. Can anybody see me? Am I back on? All right. If you can see me, give me other. Okay, good. Hey, I don't know what happened. Everything I had froze up right as I was getting ready to do the ABCs of salvation, and then it just like everything went blank and frozen up. So, Pastor Ken, if you're still watching, thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time and your dedication to the service of our Lord. You've been a faithful pastor for many decades now, and I've learned a great deal from you. So it's always a pleasure to have you on when I can get some of your time. Um, to everyone else, guys, thank you for hanging out today. If you don't know Jesus Christ as your Lord Savior, admit you're a sinner, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and confess and call on Him for your salvation, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's what we believe in, because we recognize that we can't pay for our own sins. And as good as we think we are, when we stand there that day on Judgment Day, we're not being judged against other people. We're being measured. Our righteousness is being measured against the righteousness of God, which will fail every single time. So thank you guys. Like I said, if you don't know the Lord, please come to know the Lord. John 3:16, Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23. Um, Salvation is free. It's a free gift. All you have to do is believe it and believe that the Lord Jesus died for your sins, paid for your sins, and through him we have access to our Father in heaven. So thank you guys. Thanks for hanging out. Thank you, Pastor Ken, for coming on. Thank you, Titus, for my rabbit ears. And God bless you guys. And have a happy New Year. We'll see you maybe Friday or maybe the following Monday. So take care, guys. God bless.
See you next screen, I guess. Where this can go. Bye.